Chapter 46. Old Man Lu's courtyard was very messy and there wasn't much space to step on. However, this old man didn't seem to care and seemed to have the intention to let it develop. Ningchen had no choice but to help the old man clean up the courtyard. If this continued, this courtyard wouldn't be suitable for living. The first time he came to this courtyard, he was brought here by the old man. It was very violent but also very warm. In Old Man Lu's eyes, there was no difference whether he was disabled or not. His disability might be slightly better than the trash that some old men called him. Old Man Lu didn't hit him hard just now. The main reason was that he hadn't recovered after being injured by the old eunuch. Coupled with the endless torture in the netherworld, his internal injuries worsened again and again. Once he fought, it was easy to trigger his old injuries. Since he came to this world, the most he had been injured was time and time again. It seemed that he had never fully recovered. Fortunately, he was still alive. Old Man Lu stood in front of the door and looked at the wheelchair under the busy young man. He frowned slightly. Back then it was his first time making a wheelchair. Other than adding a few small mechanisms on it, he didn't do anything else. Now, it was really difficult to make the wheelchair more agile. After all, a wheelchair wasn't a very fast thing. Ningchen wasn't in a hurry and waited for Old Man Lu to think. He had been cleaning up the courtyard. He didn't know how many days he would be gone. If he didn't clean up this old man, he probably wouldn't even have a way to come back. If Old Man Lu was in his world, he would probably be a Frankenstein monster. Come here for a moment. After a long time, Old Man Lu's frown deepened as he called out. Ningchen threw the last piece of wood against the mountain of trash in the corner, and immediately turned the wheelchair to walk over. Old Man Lu went forward and pressed his hand on the wheelchair. In the next moment, a huge force pressed down. With a bang, the wheelchair suddenly broke into pieces and scattered everywhere. Old Man Lu, Ningchen was shocked. At this moment, he pulled out his ink sword and stabbed it into the ground with a clang. He barely didn't fall on his face. Good reaction, Old Man Lu said indifferently. He bent down and picked up the two wheels on the ground and walked back into the house. Clang! The door closed and an indifferent voice came from inside. Wait outside, you're not allowed to enter the house. Only a fool would be willing to go in, Ningchen muttered. He then sat down and waited in boredom. Suddenly, Ningchen felt a stuffy feeling in his chest, and drops of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Ningchen held his chest with his left hand, and he felt a wave of irritation in his heart. Although he wouldn't die from this injury, he couldn't keep vomiting blood like this. Closing his eyes, Zhang Xian circulated his Jinqi, and a silver glow circulated through his meridians, suppressing his injuries once more. In his Dantian Qi Si, under the first golden page, the silver Qi whirlpool was growing bigger by the day, slowly rotating like a galaxy. On the side, strands of dark yellow Zhanqi gathered, vaguely forming an independent small whirlpool. Another golden page floated in the air, continuously receiving the nourishment of Zhan Yuan. Over the past few days, the growth of his cultivation had been slowing down. He knew that he had reached a bottleneck. The 5th grade of martial arts was the first hurdle in the Hotian realm. Many people were stuck at this point. Geniuses like Qing Ning, the son of God, and Xia Miaoyu, who had broken through to the peak of level 9 at such a young age, were still rare. Suppressing his injuries, Ningchen continued to cultivate in the same place. Master Lu wouldn't come out for a while. Before he went back to the palace, Ningchen had to seize every opportunity to improve his strength. He didn't know why he could break through to level 5, and the expansion of the silver Qi whirlpool was slowing down. Now, the fastest way to improve his strength was to cultivate the second Qi whirlpool as soon as possible, which might come in handy in a fight. In the past 2 days, the dark yellow Qi whirlpool had grown much faster than the silver Qi whirlpool, which had reached its limit. Under the condition that he couldn't break through to level 5, the dark yellow Qi whirlpool would be the best choice for cultivation. The sun set and the moon rose, and the world was constantly changing. The door of the room hadn't been opened yet. Ningchen sat still in the yard, letting the frost soak his clothes. Under the moonlight, a huge dark yellow whirlpool formed in the yard, with Ningchen as the center, crazily swallowing the spiritual qi between heaven and earth. Without the restriction of the bottleneck between states, the dark yellow qi whirlpool kept expanding, and in a short time it seemed to be on par with the silver qi whirlpool. However, this kind of growth still had its flaws. Without the baptism of the state, the dark yellow qi whirlpool seemed to be inferior in both quality and quantity. It was still unable to reach the boundless oppressive feeling of the silver qi whirlpool. At this moment, the door of the room opened and Master Lu walked out. His face was full of fatigue, but his old eyes were as bright as the stars. Ning Chan opened his eyes, restrained his aura, and quietly looked at the old man in front of him. "Kid, what's the use of martial arts?" Master Lu asked. "Fighting," Ning Chan said honestly. "Where's the sword in your hand?" "Killing." "What if the person you want to kill or the person who wants to kill you has difficulties?" "It's none of my business." Master Lu laughed heartily and praised. "I like your character, shameless without hiding it." "Thank you for the compliment." Ning Chan accepted calmly. "The wheelchair is ready, no need to thank me." "You think too much." Ning Chan looked at the new black wheelchair beside Master Lu, and a dazzling light burst out from his eyes. Immediately, his right hand slapped the ground, and his body suddenly flew up and landed on the wheelchair. In the next moment, the wheelchair spun 1,000 times, drawing a ray of light in the courtyard. Ning Chan suddenly stopped, looked at Master Lu in front of him, and said, "Master Lu, let's exchange blows." Master Lu laughed and replied straightforwardly, "You're asking for it." Bang! Master Lu's figure flashed, and his right palm broke through the air. Even if he suppressed the 70% success body, it was still unstoppable and extremely powerful. Ning Chan quickly retreated, dodging the attack. After 7 steps, his left hand condensed into a finger, and he leaned forward and pointed at the Master Lu's right shoulder. Master Lu leaned to the side and dodged, but Ning Chan was faster. His right hand pulled out the black sword, and with a clang, he took half a step forward again. "Treacherous!" Master Lu exclaimed, and he no longer dared to suppress his aura. With a loud bang, a terrifying pressure spread out, and in an instant Ning Chan was sent flying. Swish! The black sword in Ning Chen's hand stabbed into the ground, and he only stopped after sliding 2 zhang away. "Master Lu, do you have any shame?" Ning Chen's face was filled with anger as he questioned. "Haha, it was a slip of the hand, a slip of the hand." Elder Lu's face flushed red. It was indeed disgraceful to use one's cultivation to suppress a junior. However, this kid's moves were indeed a little strange. Although they weren't extremely fast, the angle and timing were really tricky to deal with. He still remembered when Ning Chan first came to the academy, both his legs were crippled, and his martial arts were just a rookie who had just reached the 2nd grade of the natal realm. Other than his character, there was nothing good about him. It had only been a few months and the rookie from back then had actually improved so much. It seemed that a person's potential was forced out. Although talent and disability were obstacles, they were not absolute factors. "Master Lu, I'm leaving, goodbye." Now that he had achieved his goal, Ning Chan really did not want to see Master Lu's infuriating face again. He waved his hand, turned his wheelchair and left. "I'm not seeing you," Master Lu said impatiently. "Next time, I'll bring you some of the palace's imperial wine." In the night, Ning Chen's figure slowly moved away, and he was about to disappear. Master Lu's expression changed and he changed his tone. He raised his hand and shouted loudly, "Kid, you're welcome to come again next time." Ning Chan waved his hand without looking back, and gradually disappeared into the night. Master Lu sighed in disappointment, and immediately turned to go back to his room. He would not do anything tonight and would sleep. When Ning Chan returned to the academy, the little white horse had already returned from the headmaster's place. When the man and the horse met, they immediately felt a sense of closeness. The little white horse's face came closer, and it was about to express its happiness, but it was pushed away by Ning Chan. "Go away, I'm going to sleep, do whatever you want." With a bang, Ning Chan closed the door, leaving the little white horse alone in the courtyard. It did not understand how it had provoked this strange master. The night was silent. The next day, Ning Chan went out early in the morning, and he did not even wake up the little white horse, who was still sleeping soundly. He wanted to see the headmaster for no other reason than to thank him. The residence in the academy was not a secret, and everyone knew about it. Outside a small forest in the academy, there was an ordinary house sitting there peacefully. It was snowing heavily outside, but this small house had a radius of 100 feet, and it was completely quiet. There was no snow at all. Ning Chun arrived outside the house and respectfully said, "Headmaster, Ning Chun requests an audience." With a creak, the door opened, and an old man wearing coarse clothes appeared in front of him. His appearance was ordinary, and he looked no different from any other old man on the street. However, this was one of the 5 strongest people in the world, the headmaster of Tiansong Academy. The headmaster nodded. He was no stranger to this youth. The current empress had never begged anyone before, but in the end, she had made an exception because of this youth. "I came to thank you and also to say goodbye," said Ning Chun. "Why do you want to leave?" asked the headmaster calmly. "Return to the palace." "What is it?" Ning Chun was silent and did not answer. The headmaster frowned and aggressively asked, "You don't trust me?" Ning Chun was silent once more. Saving a life and trust were 2 different things. There were very few people he could trust in this world, and that would not change just because the headmaster had saved him. "You can leave." The headmaster waved his sleeve and entered the house. "Thank you, headmaster." Ning Chun bowed before he turned around and left. The 2 of them had only met for a few breaths of time. The headmaster was very busy, and Ning Chun was also not an idle person. Thus, the 2 of them did not want to waste time talking. In the end, the 2 of them were not very familiar with each other. One had been entrusted by others while the other had no choice. In truth, there was no need for them to be familiar with each other. In this world, how could there be so many pleasantries, such as respecting the old and loving the young? The difference in strength would always be the biggest barrier between people. The headmaster was a Xiantian, while he was a Hotian. A difference of 1 day was the difference between heaven and earth. Ning Chun was not a mediocre person, so he would not do mediocre things. The little white horse was still sleeping in the courtyard. Ning Chun waited for it to wake up. He had something to say to the little white horse. He felt guilty, so he needed a bit of time. An hour later, the little white horse slowly woke up. When it saw its evil master standing in front of it, it was so scared that its sleepiness disappeared. "I'm leaving." Ning Chun thought for a long time before deciding to say it directly. "Hoochie." The little white horse got up and prepared to leave. "I'm going to leave alone." Ning Chun stared at the little white horse and said calmly, "Hoochie, hoochie." The little white horse's eyes revealed a trace of panic. It let out a series of hurried sounds from its throat. It did not know what it did wrong again. "It's not your fault. I went back on my words. However, I still have to leave." Ning Chun suppressed the unbearable feeling in his heart and sighed softly. This trip was too dangerous. Whether he could come back was another matter. He could not let the little white horse take the risk. The little white horse lowered its body and begged with a sorrowful voice. There were faint tears of pleading in its big eyes. Sigh. With a silent sigh, Ning Chun hardened his heart and left. He was not willing to look back again. Chapter 47. The little white horse's whine was still ringing in his ears, but Ning Chun's heart was like a stone, so cold that it would not waver. In the end, Ning Chun was the most ruthless person in the world, whether it was to others or to himself. The black wheelchair rolled forward, rolling on the stone floor and in the snow, leaving 2 long tracks. 2 days later, Ning Chun returned to the imperial city. He had been away for more than 3 months and now he was back. There were people he trusted, people he was afraid of, people he didn't like, and people he wanted to kill. There were still legends about him in the imperial city. They had been told hundreds of times in the streets and alleys. The marriage between the Xia kingdom and the Jinji kingdom was very successful. Ning Chun thought of the girl named Xia Miaoyu. She was clever and intelligent, and she hid her talent well. He still remembered how stunning she was when she caught the arrow with her slender hands. Such a girl could not stay silent forever. The Jinji kingdom was too small to keep a phoenix who had spread her wings for too long. The emperor of the Xia kingdom was not a simple person. Ning Chun had always thought so. Otherwise, how could he suppress the outstanding princes of the Xia kingdom in the past? In the imperial palace, the one who really made him afraid was the emperor. He had thought more than once that the emperor had wanted to kill him for a long time. The reason was simple. He had mastered something that was beyond this era, and he had shown it to the emperor twice. The first time perhaps no one cared too much. But the second time in front of so many people, the entire hall of Zhengqi was almost destroyed. It was impossible that the emperor did not notice. Back then, in order to get out of the imperial palace, he did not care so much. He had planted the seed of disaster, and it became the reason he was most afraid of returning to the imperial palace. Returning to the imperial palace was not easy for him. If he dared to enter the imperial palace openly, he would not be able to see his eldest grandson for the rest of his life. With no other choice, Ningqian decided to go to the Lingyan Pavilion and wait for 2 days. There were many people in the imperial city who were qualified to enter the imperial palace. He had to find a way to bring the news in. If Qingning could leave the imperial palace, then it did not matter whether he entered the imperial palace or not. When Ningqian arrived at the Lingyan Pavilion, it was still noon. Li Er was sitting on a stool in the middle of the hall, dozing off. Her little head nodded, looking very cute. It had been a long time since he last saw her, but the little lass hadn't changed at all. Her delicate little face still carried a trace of the naivety of a young girl, and a little silly. There was another woman in the pavilion. When she saw the young man in the wheelchair, she was shocked and swallowed her yawn. Ningqian grinned. He recognized that this was the woman who gave him the brush and ink when he beat up Zhongsun Yunxian. She was a very beautiful woman, but she was a little timid. The woman was shocked and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her face turned red as she turned around and walked upstairs. Ningqian was helpless. Was he that scary? After a while, Li Er also woke up in a daze. She glanced at the scene in front of her and stood up without any reaction. After taking 2 steps, her body suddenly froze and she cried out in surprise. Li Er! Ningqian chuckled and called out softly. Li Er's small mouth flattened as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her delicate and pitiful look made one's heart ache. Li Er, be good, don't cry. Ningqian moved his wheelchair forward and gently rubbed the little lass's head, wiping away the tears on her face. Li Er sniffled as she stopped crying. Only then did she notice that Ningqian was sitting in a wheelchair. Her tears involuntarily flowed down again as she anxiously asked, "What happened to your leg?" "It's nothing, I just fell down." Ningqian smiled and softly said. Li Er relaxed a little and wiped away her tears. She asked, "Have you seen a doctor?" "I have," Ningqian patiently replied. Not only had he seen a doctor, but he had also seen a Xiantian. "When did the doctor say it would be ready?" Li Er asked with concern. "Soon," Ningqian casually replied. If the Xia emperor was willing to give him a Xiantian pill, it should be soon. However, this was the same as him going up north to kill that Xiantian from the northern Meng imperial court. It was purely a daydream. "Young Master Ning, how have you been?" It was at this moment that a young woman in white clothes walked over. Her face was like cream and her eyes were like bright moons. Between her brows there was a trace of charm that was well concealed. The person who had come was the owner of the Ascending Mist Pavilion, Yu Hani. After so many days, Ningqian did not want to dwell on the past. He politely praised, "How have you been? Miss Hani is becoming more and more beautiful." "Thank you for your praise, young master." Yu Hani walked forward and smiled sweetly. "Is young Master Ning doing well in the academy?" Ningqian's eyes narrowed. The meaning of these words was extraordinary. There were not many people in the world who knew that he was in the academy. How did Yu Hani know? Of course, he did not expect to be able to hide it from everyone. However, it should not be known by everyone. That day when consecrated Jian had brought him back to the palace, it must have alarmed some people in the palace. Each palace would have their own spies, but there were not many who had the ability to bury spies in Weiyang Palace. Could it be that Lingyan Pavilion was related to one of the palaces in the Imperial Palace? This Yu Han-yi had given him another surprise. "Miss Han-yi, this one has underestimated you before," Ningqian indifferently replied. Yu Han-yi's words had undoubtedly revealed her identity. This Lingyan Pavilion, which occupied the most prosperous area of the imperial city, was not just a simple brothel. "Young master is too kind." Yu Han-yi smiled. "Miss Han-yi, this one is a little tired. I wonder if you could arrange a room for me?" Ningqian stopped this topic. He did not want to continue talking about it. He did not want to participate in the struggle between the palaces. He had no interest and no time. Yu Han-yi was startled. She did not expect Ningqian to refuse to talk about it. She felt a little uncomfortable but did not show it on her face. She smiled and said, "There is a room in the backyard prepared for young master. Hani will take young master there. No need, Li'er will take me there." Saying this, Ningqian turned his wheelchair and walked towards the backyard. He had lived here for more than 10 days and was not unfamiliar with the backyard. Li'er glanced at the young miss and immediately ran to follow. Her little head did not understand why the two of them were quarreling. The room is not bad. After Ningqian was brought into the room by Li'er, he looked around and gave an objective evaluation. "It's not bad, right? I cleaned it." Li'er raised her head and asked for praise. Ningqian smiled and turned his wheelchair to the bed. He looked at the dazzling array of young girls' headwear and pointed, "Don't tell me that you also prepared this for me." Li'er blushed and quickly put away the headwear. How could she forget about these things? "These things are not cheap. Where did you get so much money?" Ningqian asked curiously. She was just a little girl who served tea and had a pitiful monthly allowance. How could she afford these things? Hearing Ningqian's question, Li'er's face showed a trace of embarrassment. She said shyly, "That day when you were taken away by that fierce woman, Big Sister E made the decision to give me 40% of your profits temporarily." Ningqian laughed involuntarily. The matter was very clear. The little girl had money in her hands. When she saw beautiful headwear, her heart would definitely itch. She could not help but buy them all. Seeing that Ningqian did not blame her, Li'er was even more embarrassed. She said shyly, "When I have enough money, I will return it to you." "Aha, you can slowly save it. I am not in a hurry." Ningqian smiled. It was useless for him to have so much money. In his eyes, the little girl's happiness was more important than anything else. Since Yuhani made the decision to give the profits to Li'er, he would not say anything. With this money, if Li'er wanted to leave in the future, at least she would not have to worry about money. Thinking of this, Ningqian temporarily put down the stone in his heart. He looked at Li'er and could not help but smile strangely. Unknowingly, this little girl had become a little rich woman. On the side, Li'er felt uncomfortable being stared at by Ningqian. She picked up her headwear and was about to run away. "You rest first. I will call you for dinner." After the little girl left, the smile on Ningqian's face gradually disappeared and became gloomy. He had underestimated the strength of the spies in the palace. It seemed that the matter of him returning to the imperial city was most likely exposed. This was also good. Weiyang Palace would probably know about his return soon. He only needed to convey the words he wanted to convey to the palace through these spies. Zhang Sun was smart and would definitely be able to guess what he meant. Ningqian had a kind of blind trust in Zhang Sun. In his opinion, Zhang Sun was omnipotent. In the words of his previous life, he was Zhang Sun's die-hard fan. Outside the main hall of Weiyang Palace, Qing Ning received a slip of paper from a palace maid. After reading it, a hint of surprise flashed across her beautiful face. Shortly after, she quickly walked into the main hall. Looking at Zhang Sun, who was sitting on the main seat, she softly said, "Nyang Nyang, Ningqian has returned to the imperial city." On the main seat, Zhang Sun slightly frowned and said, "Why would he come back at this time? Is he tired of living?" Qing Ning's eyes had a trace of worry. She said, "Empress, His Majesty, shut up." Zhang Sun shouted, stopping Qing Ning from continuing. "Send someone to keep an eye on him. If there is any movement, immediately report back." "Yes." Qing Ning nodded and quickly walked out of the main hall to make the necessary arrangements. In the Imperial Hall of Great Summer, Emperor Xia sat on the dragon throne and concentrated on correcting the memorials. He did not miss a single word or sentence. He had to review everything. In the next moment in the main hall, a figure silently appeared and respectfully knelt in front of the hall. He said, "Reporting to His Majesty, Ningqian has returned to the imperial city." Emperor Xia raised his head with a calm expression. He said lightly, "Send someone to keep an eye on him. Don't allow him to take half a step out of the city. If he resists, kill him." "Yes." The shadow guard received the order and immediately disappeared. In the Western Palace, the world's most beautiful woman sat behind a curtain. In front of her, A palace maid respectfully knelt on the ground with a trace of undetectable fear on her face. Are you sure that Ningqian, who has returned to the imperial city, is the one who took the letter? A questioning voice came from behind the curtain. That day, where the bandits were killed, there were wheelchair and horsehoof prints. 10 days ago, where bodyguard Xiao died in battle, there were also messy wheelchair prints. If it is not a coincidence, this person is most likely Ningqian, the palace maid replied. Behind the curtain, a faint cold smile flashed across Wan Nichang's beautiful face. She said softly, "How can there be so many coincidences in the world? Based on the date, it is very likely that Manager Liao is already dead." The palace maid lowered her head, not daring to answer. She had indeed searched in the direction that Manager Liao left. Unfortunately, the snowstorm was too heavy a few days ago and she could not find any trace of him. In less than a quarter of an hour, the 3 most powerful palaces in the imperial palace of the Xia kingdom all reacted to Ningqian's return. Their orders were different and their motives were even more different. Ningqian also guessed that his whereabouts had been exposed, so there was no need to deliberately hide. After a short rest, he openly went out. There was still some time before nightfall, so he had to go to Duan Pharmacy. Suppressing his injuries was not a long-term solution. The shopkeeper was a miraculous doctor. He was a powerful figure who had once saved the severely injured Mu Changxue with a few needles. He should have a solution. However, when Ningqian arrived at Duan Pharmacy, he bumped into a person he had never expected. It was Yu Ling, the sickly woman who gave him the ink sword. Yu Ling in front of him was still wearing a light blue dress. She was noble but not gorgeous. There was a faint smile on her beautiful but slightly pale face. She looked exceptionally beautiful. When Ningqian saw Yu Ling also saw Ningqian. When the two met, they looked at each other gently and smiled. There was no awkwardness, nor did they pretend to be familiar with each other. "See a doctor?" Yu Ling asked. Her voice was soft and very pleasant. "See the injury," Ningqian replied. "What a coincidence," Yu Ling sighed softly. She naturally came behind Ningqian and gently pushed the wheelchair. "It is indeed a coincidence," Ningqian nodded. He also did not expect that the two would meet again so soon. In the pharmacy, the shopkeeper looked at the two people coming. He did not care at first, but the next moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Ningqian in the wheelchair. There was a trace of shock on his face. "Brother Ning, what happened to your leg?" Chapter 48. Ningqian didn't know how to explain and could only helplessly reply. "I fell and became crippled." The shopkeeper frowned and quickly stepped forward to grab Ningqian's arm. After checking his pulse, his expression became more and more unsightly. "Can I be saved?" Ningqian chuckled and asked. "Don't speak nonsense." The shopkeeper frowned and reprimanded. Ningqian's internal organs were injured and even his heart was injured. He could be saved, but it was indeed very troublesome. Ningqian didn't mind and smiled. "My injury isn't urgent. It has been a long time. You can check Miss Ling's pulse first." Only then did the shopkeeper notice the girl behind Ningqian. His expression couldn't help but become a little strange. This brat brought a different girl every time he came, and each one was prettier than the last. Ningqian didn't know what the shopkeeper was thinking, but he could roughly guess from his strange smile. "I happened to meet her." Ningqian opened his mouth to explain. This shopkeeper was a little disrespectful. He was already so old, but his thoughts were still so unrestrained. The shopkeeper laughed knowingly. He was just short of saying that he didn't believe it. Ningqian didn't explain anymore and rolled his eyes. "If you don't believe it, then forget it. Miss, this way please." The shopkeeper politely extended his hand and ignored Ningqian. Instead, he looked at the beautiful girl in front of him and said. Moon Spirit followed the shopkeeper's arrangement and sat down in front of the consultation table. She covered her mouth and coughed a few times before extending her left hand. The shopkeeper placed his hand on the girl's wrist. After a long time, he frowned again. "How is it?" Ningqian moved his wheelchair forward and asked seriously. He could see that Moon Spirit's body wasn't good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come all the way to the imperial city to find a doctor. "Miss, you must be prepared." The shopkeeper sighed softly and said tactfully. Hearing the shopkeeper's words, Moon Spirit's expression didn't change much. She was already used to it and there was nothing to be disappointed about. How much time do I have? Moon Spirit asked softly. At most 1 year. The shopkeeper answered honestly. Moon Spirit frowned but didn't say anything. She was very clear about her body. The shopkeeper's 1 year was already the longest she could live. Over the years she had seen too many doctors and taken too many elixirs. Unfortunately, the results were few and far between. Recently, the pharmacy received 1,000-year-old king blood ginseng. But, speaking up to this point, the shopkeeper glanced at Ningqian and felt a little awkward. Just now, he had planned to give the ginseng to this kid. Give it to her. I don't have any money. Ningqian poured himself a cup of tea. The 1,000-year-old blood ginseng king was very expensive. It would be a waste to let him eat it. How much money? Moon Spirit didn't refuse and asked. 100,000 taels. Ningqian spat out the tea in his mouth and asked in disbelief, how much? 100,000 taels, the shopkeeper said seriously. Cough, cough. Ningqian choked on his tea and coughed incessantly. It was no wonder that old man had been so generous and had given him a small ingot worth 5 taels. He had been so happy. So it turned out that this old man's first move was a business worth 10 or 20,000 taels. The shopkeeper looked at the woman in front of him and did not continue to speak. The price he asked for was not expensive. When he bought this ginseng king, he had already sold it at the original price because of Ningqian. Of course, if Ningqian wanted to buy it, the amount of money didn't matter. The pharmacy belonged to the Zhongsun family, so the medicinal ingredients naturally belonged to the Zhongsun family. He believed that between Ningqian and 100,000 taels of silver, the Empress would definitely not choose the latter. After hearing the price, Moon Spirit didn't have any obvious reaction. She nodded and said, tomorrow I will order someone to send the money. I hope you can keep this ginseng king for a day. Rich people. Ningqian sighed in his heart. Comparisons were odious. The total amount of money he had didn't exceed 100 taels. Moreover, he had robbed many people. The shopkeeper thought for a moment, then got up and walked into the back hall. Soon after, he came out with an exquisite wooden box in his hand. Since you and Brother Ning are old friends, you can take this ginseng king first. The money can be sent tomorrow. While speaking, the shopkeeper handed over the wooden box in his hand. Ningqian's eyelids twitched. 100,000 taels. If Moon Spirit ran away with it, would the shopkeeper chop him to death? Moon Spirit looked at Ningqian in surprise. She didn't expect the latter to have such a big face. 100,000 taels was not a small amount. Even she had to send someone to prepare it for a day. Ningqian smiled shyly. Good character. The shopkeeper wrote a prescription for Moon Spirit to take with the blood ginseng king. As for the medicinal herbs, they weren't worth much, so they were all given away. Ningqian waited at the side. He wasn't in a hurry, drinking cup after cup of free tea. In his eyes, Moon Spirit was a wonderful person. She didn't force life or death, but she didn't give up either. He really admired her. After the shopkeeper wrote a prescription for Moon Spirit, he wrote another prescription for Ningqian. There weren't many medicinal herbs, but they were all very precious. 800 taels. The shopkeeper handed the prescription to Ningqian and said lightly, cough cough. Ningqian took the prescription and looked at it for a long time. He pointed at the top of the list and said weakly, this snow caltrip flower shouldn't be of any use. Do you want to remove it? The shopkeeper looked at him with contempt and said, this is the main ingredient. Ningqian was speechless. He continued to look for it with his scalp numb. Then, he pointed at another medicinal herb and said tentatively, do you want to remove this? The disdain in the shopkeeper's eyes became stronger and stronger. He said indifferently, this is the guiding ingredient. Do as you see fit. Ningqian had a headache. He simply made up his mind and said fearlessly, I don't have enough money. The shopkeeper returned to the counter and flicked the abacus. He didn't even raise his head and said, how much do you have? Ningqian took out a small bag from behind his back and poured out the money. He counted and said weakly, 75 taels. The shopkeeper counted a few times and said, I'll leave you 5 taels. Pay 70 taels. The rest will be recorded. Ningqian was reluctant, but he had no choice. He took out a small silver ingot with 5 taels and pushed the rest of the money over. Ningchen owes 730 taels. The shopkeeper took the account book from the top right corner of the counter and wrote down 8 words neatly on a single page. It was so eye-catching. Ningchen's eyelids followed the movements of the pen in the shopkeeper's hand and jumped with each word. In such a short time he actually owed such a huge amount of money. He wasn't a rich person and didn't know how to do anything other than chop firewood. When would he be able to repay this money? Ningchen was habitually distracted. He didn't even know when Moon Spirit pushed him out of the pharmacy. He was worried about how to earn some money. As for the bonus in Li Er's hands, he didn't even think about getting it back. He really couldn't afford to lose face. Are you short of money? Behind the wheelchair, Moon Spirit asked softly with a trace of curiosity. She couldn't understand the youth in front of her more and more. The latter's thoughts were never on the same line as most people. Ningchen scratched his head in embarrassment. He was afraid of being short of money. Ever since he came to this world, the thing he worried about the most was not having money. When he was in the palace, Zhang Sun cut off all his sources of money and didn't leave him a single coin. The money he used to run away was sponsored by the shopkeeper. In the end, it was taken away by Yuhani to pay off the debt. Where does young Master Ning live? It was getting late. Moon Spirit wanted to go back and rest. If it wasn't on the way, they were ready to part ways. Lingyan Pavilion, Ningchen replied. Brothel. Moon Spirit's beautiful face flashed with a strange expression as she asked. Yes. Ningchen nodded awkwardly. He and Moon Spirit had met twice, and it seemed that both times were related to brothels. Let's go. Moon Spirit continued to push the wheelchair. Coincidentally, the places they lived were not far from each other. When the two arrived in front of the Lingyan Pavilion, the sky was gradually darkening. The land beside the Inshui River was the most prosperous area in the entire imperial city. Every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Once night fell, there would be more people. Li Er stood in front of the Lingyan Pavilion, looking left and right. Her small face was anxious. It was already so late, why hadn't that guy come back yet? He couldn't have been taken away by that fierce woman again, right? Not long after, Moon Spirit pushed Ningchen over. Li Er looked and immediately walked over fiercely. She put her hands on her hips and scolded. What time is it? You still know to come back? Haha. Ningchen became even more embarrassed. If he retorted, the other party was a little girl. If he didn't rebuke, being reprimanded by a little girl to the point that he didn't dare to utter a single word, it would simply affect his image in Moon Spirit's heart. In the end, Ningchen decided to let his image die. The little girl's artillery fire was very fierce. It went from a drizzle to a downpour, and it even had thunder and lightning. In an instant, it extinguished the flames of resistance that Ningchen had just ignited. It wasn't that our army was too weak, but that the enemy was too strong. After scolding for half a day, Li Er was a little thirsty. Only then did she notice Moon Spirit behind Ningchen. Her small face instantly became extremely strange. This guy only went out once and brought back such a beautiful woman. This was too fast. Taking advantage of the little girl's rest, Moon Spirit finally cut in. Her expression was very interesting as she said, I'm going back. See you later. Ningchen nodded and said goodbye. After Moon Spirit left, Li Er lowered her head and asked in a small voice, Do eunuchs also like beautiful women? Ningchen was instantly hurt and couldn't speak. Was he a eunuch? No. Guess it yourself. Ningchen gloomily threw down this sentence. Soon after, he turned his wheelchair and walked forward. He had already run out of the palace, but he still couldn't get rid of his identity as a little eunuch. How sad, how depressing. When could he stand on top of the imperial city and shout to the sky, I'm not a eunuch? Because of his bad mood, Ningchen silently ate 2 more bowls of rice at night. Then he returned to his room to rest. The bustling of Lingyan Pavilion continued until the Z hour before it gradually quieted down. After the Z hour, regardless of whether it was the guests or the women in the pavilion, they all returned to their rooms to rest. The cold night was bleak. The bright moon shone high in the sky, silently sprinkling down a waterfall of coldness. The cold winter moon was always exceptionally beautiful. Perhaps it was that coldness that couldn't be touched that made people's hearts beat endlessly. In the backyard, Ning-chun opened his eyes. He turned his wheelchair and came to the door. His eyes were colder than the moonlight. At this moment a swift and fierce sword light pierced through the air. It was brighter than the moon and faster than the wind. Ning-chun retreated and returned to his room. With a bang he closed the door. Slash! The sword pierced through the door, but it couldn't pierce the retreating Ning-chun. At the same time, an ink sword pierced through the door and entered a warm body. She couldn't see Ning-chun, but Ning-chun could see her, because the moonlight outside the door was really very bright. Chapter 49. The moonlight shone through the paper window, casting the assassin's shadow on it. The feeling of the sword piercing through the body was indescribably wonderful. It was like breaking a fragile piece of porcelain, satisfying a human's desire to destroy. Ning-chun didn't think he was a pervert, but in order to save his life, he didn't mind experiencing this perverted feeling. A muffled groan came from outside the door. It was a woman's voice. It was very clear and couldn't be hidden. Ning-chun didn't like to hit women, let alone kill them. However, women who wanted to kill him were an exception. With a bang, the door was broken through by the wheelchair. Ning-chun rushed out of the room with the ink sword in his hand. He took 3 steps forward with the woman's body. Suddenly, a horrifying arrow light came from afar. It was so wonderful that no one could avoid it. You again. Ning-chun's pupils shrank. He was furious. This was the 3rd time. There was no end to it. The ink sword turned and took the woman's body in front of the wheelchair. Then with a screech, the arrow light pierced through the woman's body. The momentary delay gave Ning-chun a chance to react. He grabbed the arrow with his left hand, but he felt a huge force. His whole body was pushed back 3 steps, and he crashed into the half-destroyed door with a bang. Ning-chun groaned. Blood flowed out from his left chest and dyed his clothes red. The arrow was halfway into his body. It couldn't stop and couldn't go any further. Ning-chun was covered in cold sweat. This arrow was too dangerous. He wasn't Xia Miaoyu. He couldn't completely block this arrow. The woman was dead. Her eyes lost focus and she fell down powerlessly. Ning-chun pulled the arrow out of his chest. He was scared. If the woman hadn't blocked it, he would be the one lying on the ground. This person can't be left alive. Ning-chun was still sweating. Only after facing the arrow did he know how terrifying this person's archery was. However, he noticed that this person only shot 3 arrows at most at one time. Moreover, this person never showed his face. He had his suspicions when Zhang Sun was assassinated. At that time, if this person had come out to intercept them, he and Zhang Sun would have had no chance to survive. Even after he pulled Zhang Sun and made a prompt decision to blend into the crowd, there was no second fatal arrow. Judging from all the signs, it was very likely that the person who shot the arrow had difficulty moving. Once he left his line of sight, there would be no danger. Coincidentally, his movements were also very inconvenient. But he has a good wheelchair. In the next moment, the wheelchair spun 9 times and Ning-chun's figure quickly moved forward. He wasn't worried that there would be arrows at this time. It was always difficult to hit a moving target with arrows. That woman didn't die in vain. At the very least, he could tell the exact direction the arrow came from through the woman's body. This person's arrow was too fast. If not, he would have to go to the underworld to make a judgment based on his own corpse. There weren't many places in the imperial city that could overlook the Lingyan Pavilion. Based on the direction the arrow came from, it wasn't difficult to determine the location. The only thing he had some misgivings about was just how strong was this person's Dao protector. Under the cold moonlight, a black light flashed in the night. Mr. Liu of the academy was a genius in craftsmanship. After the black wheelchair was driven by his genuine qi, it moved much faster than expected. Ning-chun looked at the pagoda in front of him with a cold glint in his eyes. There were very few people who believed in Buddhism in Great Xia, and he didn't believe in it either. Buddha talked about the afterlife, but he cared more about this life. If there was an afterlife, he hoped that the world would be peaceful. The pagoda was very tall and there was light. It wasn't candlelight, but the moonlight reflected by the saraira. It was said that a long time ago, Buddhism was once popular on this land. After the eminent monks of that time passed away, they might leave behind saraira. The existence of this pagoda was even older than the history of the Great Xia dynasty. Although the Great Xia dynasty didn't believe in Buddhism, they would still renovate this ancient pagoda over the years. Soon Ningchen arrived at the bottom of the pagoda. He looked up, wondering if he should go up or wait. In the end he decided to go up. If this dead person stayed up there for the whole night, wouldn't he have to wait for the whole night like a fool? Was he a fool? He obviously wasn't. Ningchen hated stairs the most. Things like wheels weren't suitable for climbing up and down. The pagoda was very tall, so there were naturally many stairs. Took him a lot of effort. The wind at the top of the pagoda was very strong. Ningchen squinted his eyes slightly. He didn't know when he had developed this habit. There were two people waiting in front of him. One was a man and the other was disabled. The man was holding a flute in his hand. When he saw the young man, he frowned. The disabled man turned around with difficulty and grinned. His ugly face made people feel disgusted. He looked strange and his combination was also strange. Ningchen thought to himself, how could he catch up with him in Zhongsun when he was disabled like this? He couldn't move his legs, but the person in front of him seemed to only be able to move his hands. It was really terrifying for such a person to be able to practice such archery. As for the man holding the flute, Ningchen didn't pay much attention to him at first. Here the biggest threat to him was the bow in the disabled man's hand. The man holding the flute didn't give off any oppressive aura. Unless a powerful warrior reached the Xiantian realm, it was very difficult for them to completely conceal their aura. The more powerful a person was, the more oppressive they would be. The green bow in the disabled man's hand was too dangerous. He didn't know if his guess was true. If the disabled man could shoot that kind of terrifying arrow endlessly, there was no need to fight today. Ningchen slowly pulled out his ink sword from behind the wheelchair. Today he had to get rid of this terrifying enemy. He didn't want to be shot to death by a silent arrow on the street. The man's face was also very serious. He could feel danger from the young man's sword. This was not the wasteland, and his strength was greatly reduced. At the scene, only the disabled man kept smiling. His smile was twisted and perverted. Suddenly he drew the bow and nocked an arrow. The arrow was like a shooting star, instantly arriving in front of Ningchen. Ningchen blocked with his sword. With a clang, the arrowhead drew a spark and was blown away by the ink sword. The disabled man's smile became even brighter. His ugly face was twisted and he looked a bit scary. Ningchen's expression didn't change. This kind of arrow was no threat to him. The north wind on the top of the tower was getting colder and colder. The cold moon hanging high in the sky shone on the three people, making this life and death battle even colder. The man held the flute in his hand and put it near his mouth. Ningchen was shocked. He subconsciously felt that something was wrong. He moved his ink sword and rushed forward. Whoosh! Another arrow came and blocked his path. He had no choice but to turn his sword back to block it. Woo! The next moment, a low and gloomy sound of the flute was heard above the pagoda. The decadent sound made people's minds sink in an instant. The devilish sound was soul-sucking and went straight to the heart. Ningchen turned his right hand and the ink sword mercilessly pierced into his leg. He felt a sharp pain and forcibly dispelled the dizziness in his head. However, at this moment an arrow more dazzling than the moon arrived in an instant. The cold wind at the end of the arrow was hissing, piercing people's minds. I've been waiting for you. Ningchen's eyes were cold. He didn't dodge. In front of him, a big black umbrella opened and instantly covered the dazzling arrow. Boom! With a terrible bang, the arrow hit the big black umbrella and created the most horrible sound wave. The three people present only felt a sharp pain in their ears and their blood kept surging in their bodies. The wheelchair was shaken by the huge force and only stopped when it was 10 meters away. The big black umbrella was completely destroyed and a big hole was blown out. However, the terrible arrow also lost its power and fell down powerlessly. Ningchen didn't feel sorry at all. He pulled the mechanism that fixed the big black umbrella from the sides of the wheelchair with his left hand, and then threw it aside casually. He could ask Elder Lu to install another one when he returned to the academy. There was nothing to feel sorry about. He was lucky to be able to block the arrow. The mechanism structure of the wheelchair was proposed by him. The design method and materials were prepared by Elder Lu. Neither of them was a gentleman. Therefore, the biggest function of the wheelchair was to trick people and save their lives. Well, the mechanism is used up. We don't owe each other anything. Let's start again and have a fair fight. Ning Chan moved the wheelchair 10 meters forward and said lightly. The man stepped forward, put away the flute in his hand, and then pulled out a machete from behind. He looked at the young man in front of him coldly and accepted the challenge. Man, Ning Chan praised him. The ink sword in his hand trembled and frost condensed with a touch of coldness. He liked this kind of gentleman's behavior. The man moved first. The machete was like a moon, and the fiercest killing light flashed. He knew his strength, which was not supposed to be his strength. Among the three of them, he was the fastest. The man was very good at using his own machete. They were people from the grassland and had their own machete since they were young. They had been with each other for many years and had become close friends. Facing the machete, Ning Chan raised his sword and swung it down. It was simple and pure without any moves. However, it was this simple sword or machete that made the man's expression change drastically. He realized that he could not avoid it no matter what he did. He did not know that this was the young man's best move. A line in front of the chest was a forbidden area. Ning Chan had chopped firewood in the academy for more than 2 months. He had swung this move thousands of times. It was so familiar that it was almost engraved in his bones. The man could not avoid it and could only block it with his machete. The machete and sword met. With a bang, the two of them sank 3 inches into the ground. Whoosh! A black light flashed between the two of them. The man's eyes narrowed, and a touch of disbelief flashed across his face. The man fell down. The arrow in his chest was still trembling. He did not understand. Didn't Ning Chan say that they would start again and have a fair fight? Fool, I lied to you. The corners of Ning Chan's mouth curled into a cold arc as he spoke. What was fair? You die, I live. That was fair. In the world, the most untrustworthy thing was your enemy. If you knew that it was your enemy and still believed it, what else could you be if you were not a fool? Now there are only 2 of us left. How do you think we should settle this? Ning Chan moved his wheelchair forward and looked at the cripple in front of him. There was no suspense in the rest of the battle. The bow was a long-range weapon after all. At such a close distance, he would not give the cripple a chance to draw his bow again. The cripple laughed strangely. He did not beg for mercy, nor did he shoot the arrow in his hand. He grabbed the railing on the top of the tower with his right hand and used his strength to break the railing. Then his body fell backward like a kite with a broken string. The Zhao clan will come for you sooner or later. The person who fell did not have any reluctance to leave the world. Only his curse-like voice echoed in the night sky, lingering for a long time. Ning Chan narrowed his eyes. He did not know who the Zhao clan was, but he knew that he would survive today. The Saraira on the pagoda was still emitting a gentle light. Buddha said that if you put down the butcher's knife, you would become a Buddha. But who would have thought that if you put down the butcher's knife, you would only become a ghost? It was still the same sentence. If there was another life, he hoped that the world would be peaceful. Chapter 50. It was already halfway through the night, and the cold wind was even more bone-chilling. Ning Chan faintly felt that his legs were starting to hurt again. He couldn't help but feel irritated, and went down the pagoda with a gloomy face. The pagoda was 10 zhang tall, and it couldn't be more dead. The green bow and arrow box were scattered not far away, emitting a cold light. This is a good bow, Ning Chan commented. Actually, he didn't know what kind of bow was good and what kind of bow wasn't. He only judged based on his feelings. This bow almost shot him through the heart last time, and this time it almost shot him through the heart again. It could be said that there was a deep hatred between them. The material of the bow wasn't like wood, but a kind of metal that he couldn't understand. There were too many strange things in this world, and he couldn't distinguish them. The inside of the green bow was engraved with the 2 words, Broken Death. It was simple and grand and seemed to be quite old. It should be worth a lot of money. From today onwards this green bow was his, and the arrow box was also his. The way back was a bit far, and Ning Chan didn't want to waste his energy, so he walked slowly. The wheelchair squeaked on the stone road, and it was a bit harsh, but it was better than the emptiness and loneliness. Dark clouds gradually covered the moon, and this damned sky seemed to be about to snow again. It was endless and it made people unhappy. Occasionally there would be extremely soft sounds behind him, and Ningqian knew that there were people following him, and it wasn't just one or two people. He was too lazy to pay attention to these. As long as no one killed him, it was fine. Among the people following him, there must be Zhang Sun's spies. If he accidentally hurt the wrong person, it would be a big joke. In this world, there weren't many people he was afraid of, but unfortunately, Zhang Sun was one of them. The cold wind was especially cold. Ningqian walked on the road and unconsciously trembled, and the hand holding the wheelchair was slightly stiff. Don't tell me I'm going to vomit blood again. The stuffiness in his chest made his bad mood even worse. He had already drunk the medicine last night, and the effects seemed to be very normal. 800 taels of silver was lost. Lingyan Pavilion was already very quiet, and the women of the brothel also needed to rest. Everyone said that prostitutes were heartless and actors were unloyal, but the truly heartless ones were these self-proclaimed romantic brothel patrons. What Ningqian hated the most in his life were these so-called romantic scholars. Scholars were romantic, but behind them were the tears and blood of women. Du Sherngyang jumped into the river, Chan Yuanyuan became a monk, Lu Ru hung herself, and Li Shishir would rather die than submit. He wasn't a nationalistic youth, but if anyone dared to call themselves a romantic scholar in front of him, he would definitely kick them in the face. Young Master Ning. At this moment, a beautiful figure slowly walked out from under the moonlight. It was Moon Spirit, who he had just parted with. It's already so late and you're still awake? Ningqian's face revealed a trace of surprise as he asked. Moon Spirit looked thoughtfully in the direction of the pagoda and replied softly, I heard some noises just now, so I came out to take a look. Ningqian understood that it must have been caused by the collision between the arrow and the big black umbrella. He didn't expect that Moon Spirit, who was so far away, would notice it. It seemed that what happened tonight would soon spread throughout the imperial city. Enhe's night was very beautiful, but the weather was not on his side, and it gradually started to snow. Let me send you back, Ningqian said, worried about Moon Spirit's health. Moon Spirit didn't refuse. She lived not far from here, less than a quarter of an hour's walk. Ningqian turned the wheelchair himself. He didn't let Moon Spirit help him push it. The night was too cold, and the wheelchair would be very cold. Cough, cough. The falling snow was very beautiful and cold. Moon Spirit was wearing a lot of clothes, but she still kept coughing softly. It seemed that they were a little similar. They both didn't like snow. After knowing each other for a few days, Ningqian found that he knew almost nothing about this strange woman. He couldn't help but ask curiously, Miss Ling, where is your hometown? North. Moon Spirit pointed to the north and said softly. Ningqian smiled. He knew it was the north that day. When they met, it was in the north of Great Xia. However, since Moon Spirit didn't want to tell him, he didn't ask anymore. Young Master Ning, what's your lifelong dream? Moon Spirit looked at the distant north, and a flash of color flashed in her eyes. It was so bright that people didn't dare to look directly at it. Ningqian fell silent. This question was too difficult for him to answer. He used to want to leave the palace and then he left. Now he was trying his best to go back. If he really had to say something, it would be to be able to stand up one day. It was a very simple wish, but it seemed unattainable. What about you? Ningqian didn't answer but asked back. The world is peaceful, and the people are rich. When Moon Spirit said this, there was no pretense on her beautiful face. She was pure and noble, untainted by a speck of dust. Ningqian became even more silent. He wasn't as good as her. He always pushed the world's peace to the next life because he knew he couldn't do it. This was a dream that couldn't be blasphemed, but it was also the most difficult dream to realize. They arrived at the Pleasant Inn. Moon Spirit went up to rest. Ningqian watched her go up the stairs, then turned his wheelchair and left. He sincerely hoped that her dream could be realized. After returning to Lingyan Pavilion, Ningqian sat in front of the bed and looked at the broken death bow in his hand. He immediately circulated his martial arts and gently pulled the bowstring. The bow was very hard, but it didn't move at all. He had no choice but to continue to exert force and channel his vital energy into the bow. However, he felt a majestic suction force, and the vital energy in his body was instantly reduced by 30%. No wonder. Ningqian frowned and muttered to himself. This bow was indeed strange. It consumed too much vital energy, and an ordinary person couldn't even pull it open once. Currently, he could only pull it open twice at most. This thing could be used to save his life, but he couldn't use it every time he fought. Otherwise, he would be exhausted to death. Putting the broken death bow behind his back, Ningqian closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. He had been fighting too many times recently, and getting injured was like eating a meal. If he didn't take the time to heal himself now, he would be in for a treat the next time he fought. The night passed quickly, but the first rays of dawn didn't come. Light snow fell slowly, dyeing the entire sky of the imperial city a beautiful white. Outside the Lingyan pavilion, Ningqian had left his room very early. He turned his wheelchair and came to Yinhe's side. Looking at the floating snow on the ice, he gradually couldn't help but fall in love with this pure and beautiful scenery. If it weren't for his legs, the snow wouldn't be so bad. The snow in the imperial city wasn't heavy, and it didn't affect the people's travel. People came and went, bustling with activity. It was simple and peaceful, but it spoke volumes about life. After a night of thinking, Ningqian finally knew how to contact Zhongsun and make Emperor Xia and the Western Palace apprehensive so that they wouldn't dare to act brazenly. Unfortunately, he had to leave without saying goodbye again this time. Ningqian turned his wheelchair and came to the top of the pagoda. From the top of the pagoda, he looked at the imperial city in the distance. Then he took out the broken death bow behind him, drew the bow, knocked an arrow, and shot at the Weiyang Palace. Whoosh! The iron arrow, reinforced by the vital energy of the scripture of life, was wrapped in a silver light. It pierced through the obstacles of the void and shot at the Weiyang Palace like a shooting star. In the Weiyang Palace, Qing Ning's expression changed drastically. She looked at the silver light shooting towards her from the sky. Her figure dashed 30 feet away and pulled out the long sword closest to her. Soon after, she stomped her feet and flew up, blocking the frightening arrow light with her sword. With a bang, the sword couldn't withstand the huge force and shattered into pieces. Qing Ning's eyes narrowed, and her delicate hand reached for the iron arrow in the silver light. Suddenly, Qing Ning's body shook. After grabbing the iron arrow, she turned around and flew towards Zhongsuan's palace. Behind the iron arrow, a moon-shaped jade pendant swayed. Qing Ning's heart was heavy. She knew that the Empress had left it for that kid to save his life. Very few people knew about it, so no one would use it to threaten him. In that case, this jade pendant must have been shot by Ningqian himself. The situation was urgent, so Qing Ning didn't have time to think about why he had such ability. She was worried that he was in danger and urgently needed her and the Empress to save him. Zhongsun had just woken up not long ago, so the first prince wasn't in the palace. The 9th princess was also confined because of Ningqian, so no one would come to greet her early in the morning. As for the concubines in the palace, they would only come after breakfast. Qing Ning didn't knock on the door and directly pushed it open. This caused Zhongsun, who was still dressing up, to frown. She wasn't blaming her, but she knew Qing Ning's personality. If there wasn't something important, she wouldn't be so rude. What's wrong? Zhongsun continued to dress up and asked calmly. Qing Ning quickly walked forward and handed over the arrow in her hand. Her expression was full of worry. Seeing the jade pendant on the arrow, Zhongsuan's hand paused. After thinking for a moment, she stood up and said with a serious expression, "Come, follow me out of the palace." "Empress, could something have happened to Ningqian?" Qing Ning asked worriedly. "No, he wants to tell me that he has something urgent to see me about." Zhongsun shook her head and said. At the same time, the Western Palace and the Heavenly Mandate Palace both reacted. That arrow was so dazzling that the hidden cultivators in the palace had all seen it. But no matter what, they were too slow this time. No matter how fast the spy's information was, it still took time. When Ningqian's action reached the palace, Zhongsun and Qing Ning had already left the palace. After Ningqian shot that arrow, he stayed on the pagoda and didn't move. He was waiting for Zhongsun to come. Sure enough, after waiting for a while, a carriage slowly came from afar. There were no guards, no maids, and no eunuchs. Only Qing Ning accompanied it. Zhongsuan's trust was a bit heavy. After the experience of being assassinated, she still dared to leave the palace like this. This made the burden in his heart even heavier. However, he stood so high, and with Qing Ning's existence, No one in the world could hurt Zhang Sun unless they were in the innate realm. The higher he stood, the farther he could see. Naturally, the arrow in his hand could also shoot far. Zhang Sun's carriage arrived quickly. There were many spies of Weiyang Palace outside the palace. It was easy to determine his location. The carriage stopped under the pagoda. Qing Ning accompanied Zhang Sun up the pagoda and saw Ning Chun sitting in a wheelchair at a glance. "Your Highness, Sister Qing Ning." They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Ning Chun didn't know what to say. He grinned and greeted them. Seeing Ning Chun in a wheelchair, Qing Ning's heart ached. She almost cried. She didn't care that Zhang Sun was present. She walked up and gently slapped his head. Humph! Beside them, Zhang Sun snorted coldly. He couldn't bear it. At the same time, he was dissatisfied and angry with this guy. Time was tight. Ning Chun didn't dare to delay. He turned his wheelchair forward and handed over the letter in his hand. "Your Highness, this letter has too many implications. I had no choice but to ask you to come out." Zhang Sun took the letter and glanced at the torn wax on it. She said lightly, "Have you read it?" This was the special wax of a general in the barracks. It wouldn't be used unless it was extremely important. Tearing open a military letter without permission was also a capital offense. Ning Chun scratched his head embarrassedly. If he didn't read it, how would he know the seriousness of the matter? Zhang Sun didn't make a fuss. If she really did, this guy had committed too many mistakes. Even if he died 100 times, it wouldn't be too many. Zhang Sun opened the letter and glanced at it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Immediately, her face darkened. What a Beiwu Marquis! Chapter 51. The letter couldn't be fake. There was a general's seal at the end of the letter, but whether the contents of the letter were true or false had too much implications. Zhang Sun's hand, which was holding the letter, turned pale. His expression was extremely ugly, and he could not believe the contents of the letter. If this was true, then there would be a huge earthquake in Great Xia. Ning Chun sat there, not daring to make a sound. His mission of delivering the letter had been completed, and the remaining matters were not something he could do. "Ning Chun, you can't stay in the imperial city. Where are you prepared to go?" Zhang Sun put away the letter and made a prompt decision. Qing Ning was shocked and was about to speak when Zhang Sun reached out to stop her. Now that Ning Chun knew of this secret, Emperor Xia would definitely not let him off. This time, even she was powerless to stop him. Qing Ning glanced at Ning Chan and a trace of pity appeared on her beautiful face. The latter had risked his life to deliver the letter from afar. It was too cruel for him to leave just like that. Ning Chun grinned, indicating that it was fine. He turned to look at Zhang Sun. "Nyang Nyang, I need to make a trip to the east. It might be a bit troublesome to leave the city. Can you give me a ride?" "Yes." Zhang Sun's eyes flashed and he nodded in agreement. Ning Chun was right. It was indeed difficult for him to leave the city. Emperor Xia would not allow someone who might be out of control to leave the imperial city. If he wanted to leave, he would only be a corpse. The three of them descended from the pagoda, and then they sat in the carriage and quickly headed towards the city gates. In the shadows, a wisp of anxiety appeared on the face of a shadow guard, but he didn't dare to stop them. Emperor Xia's order was to stop Ning Chun within the imperial city and kill him without mercy once he stepped out of the city. However, with the empress accompanying him, they were unable to stop him, and they did not dare to make a move. If there was anyone capable of resisting the might of Emperor Xia, Zhang Sun would definitely be one of them. No one could ignore the influence of Zhang Sun's lineage in the Great Xia, not even Emperor Xia. The carriage heading east continued to move forward. After Zhang Sun sent Ning Chun out of the city, he stepped down and let the latter drive the carriage away. When the guards at the east gate saw that it was the empress, they were so scared that they didn't dare to make a sound, let alone check who was in the carriage. Inside the imperial city, the shadow guards watched as the carriage left, but they were powerless and did not dare to step out of the city gate. The reason was simple. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning were standing in front of the city. "Let's go back." Seeing that the carriage had already disappeared before his eyes, Zhang Sun called out to Qing Ning before turning around and walking towards the city. Qing Ning sighed inwardly and followed him. She could no longer help him. He had to walk his own path in the future. Ning Chun drove the carriage all the way to the east, temporarily avoiding all the spies. The first thing he needed to do was to go to Sword City and look for Wuxia. That was what was truly dangerous. After all, there were still rules in the imperial city of Great Xia. Even Emperor Xia had to consider the influence of many parties and could not be too unbridled. However, Sword City was different. It was a place without any rules, and the only rule was the sword in one's hand. The strong were respected. This was the truest portrayal of Sword City. Before Wuxia, there were only 5 Xiantian realm experts in the world. However, the true experts gathered in Sword City. This was a fact that even the 5 Xiantian realm experts could not deny. There was a sword in Sword City that had been battered by the wind and rain for many years, but it had never been unsheathed. This sword was Sword City itself, a forbidden area where there might be a terrifying existence that surpassed the Xiantian realm. And now, another Xiantian realm expert had appeared in Sword City, becoming the 6th Xiantian realm expert in the world. This caused Sword City's prestige to rise to the peak. One had to know that even the Eternal Night Sect, which had existed for countless years, only had 2 Xiantian realm experts. As for the Great Xia, which had been invincible for thousands of years, there was only 1 Xiantian realm expert. In Sword City there were many sword scars. It was said that the Xiantian realm expert left these scars behind when he practiced his sword. Each of the sword scars was filled with incomparably powerful sword intent. This was an irresistible temptation to swordsmen in the world. The Xiantian realm expert in Sword City did not stop the swordsmen from all over the world. 10 years ago, he even took in 3 talented young people. 10 years later, the weakest of the 3 had reached the 9th realm, and the strongest had even taken the crucial half-step. Once the opportunity came, it was very likely that he would take the last half-step and become the 7th Xiantian realm expert in the world. However, other than the 3 of them, no one in Sword City had ever seen that Xiantian realm expert. They could only feel the incomparably powerful sword intent from Sword City. Even though its sharpness was restrained, it still made all the swordsmen in the world submit to it. No one knew how terrifying this sword would be when it was unsheathed. Would it really be able to match or even surpass the Xiantian realm? Ning Chen's future was destined not to be smooth. Wuxia had already reached the Xiantian realm, an existence that was different from mortals. Xiantian realm, another way to describe it was as a heavenly being. A heavenly being. This was not a realm that mortals could understand. Xiantian realm experts rarely took action. At most, they could only be used as a deterrent. Ning Chen only wanted an answer this time. Even if he knew it was impossible, he had to go. The carriage ran wildly in the wilderness without stopping. Snowflakes drifted in the air, and the carriage's tracks quickly disappeared. This trip to Sword City would take at least 10 days. In these 10 days, he had to do everything he could to increase his strength and protect himself. He did not want to be killed by those lunatics in Sword City before he could even see Wuxia. Swordsmen were powerful existences, and they were the most difficult to get along with in the world. Just like the sword consecrator, he had the strangest temper in the palace. In the palace of Great Xia, Zhongsun, who had already returned to the palace, went directly to the Heavenly Mandate Palace to meet Emperor Xia. On the Dragon Throne, Emperor Xia had already received the news from the Shadow Guards and knew what had happened in the Imperial City. "Empress, what's the matter?" Emperor Xia did not intend to expose the matter and asked seriously. Although Ning Chen's life and death were important, it was not enough to change his relationship with the Empress. "Your Majesty, this is a letter from the northern borderline." Zhongsun stepped forward and handed over the letter in his hand. Emperor Xia frowned and took the letter. After opening it, he quietly read it. Bang! The next moment, Emperor Xia was so angry that he slammed the table and stood up. At this moment, an extremely hurried voice came from outside the main hall, announcing the arrival of a disciple. "Your Majesty, bad news. The 8th prince was assassinated on his way back to the palace. He is seriously injured and unconscious. His life is in danger." "What?" The successive bad news caused Emperor Xiao's body to sway, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered and fell down in front of the dragon throne. "Quickly call for an imperial physician." Zhongsun's expression changed and he immediately shouted, "Yes." The eunuch who came in to report was frightened and hastily went out to pass down the order. At the same time, at the northern gate of the imperial city, Moon Spirit sat in a carriage and left. The old woman sat to the side with faint bloodstains on her clothes. How is it? Moon Spirit coughed a few times and asked. His heart is broken. He won't live past today. The old woman replied. Very good. Moon Spirit nodded and calmly said. Originally, she did not need to personally come here, but this matter involved her future plans and she could not afford to make any mistakes. Thus she had to be careful. The carriage was quiet. The old woman thought for a moment and softly said, Young miss, this subordinate still has something to tell you. Speak. Moon Spirit indifferently said. According to the news from noble consort Wan, the youth who was happily chatting with young miss was Ning Chan. As she spoke, the old woman's expression became somewhat unsightly. She had only just received this news, but it was too late. Moon Spirit frowned and a trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. She had truly been too careless. Unexpectedly, she had never suspected him. However, that day in Fallen Moon City, when she had taken Ning Chen's pulse, the latter's pulse definitely did not belong to a eunuch. Where is he now? Moon Spirit's expression turned cold as she coldly asked. He's already headed east. The old woman replied. Send people to chase after him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. Moon Spirit ruthlessly said. Yes. The old woman respectfully accepted the order. Ning Chan did not know that the woman who had been happily chatting with him the day before was actually willing to risk everything to kill him. A person's emotions were so fragile at this moment. In terms of position, they were worthless. Fortunately, snow fell in time and covered the carriage's tracks, slowing down the chase. Within the carriage, Ning Chan closed his eyes and rested. He wanted to break through to the 5th grade natal realm, but unfortunately after a few attempts he had no choice but to give up. Right now, he was only a paper's distance away from the 5th grade natal realm. However, this paper's distance had forcibly stopped him in his tracks. He was not a genius, so encountering a bottleneck was a very normal thing. For this kind of matter, being impatient was useless. If he forcefully broke through, it was very likely that he would go berserk due to his unstable state of mind. On the path of martial arts, if he did not advance, he would fall back. If he failed to break through, it would leave behind a hidden danger. If he wanted to break through again in the future, it would be almost impossible. Right now, the two true essence cyclones in his body were about the same size. However, if he really fought, there would still be a certain gap. The first page of the life scroll that he cultivated was the foundation of his martial arts. The second page of the life scroll's effects were much worse. The main reason was that it lacked the tempering to break through to the next realm. Moreover, the second page of the life scroll's techniques that he could not cultivate now made him gnash his teeth in hatred. This kind of feeling was like having a large pile of silver in front of him, but someone told him that the silver belonged to his eldest grandson. This was the only move recorded in the life scroll. He had been practicing it all this time, but his progress was very slow. The cost of using this move was a bit excessive, but it also had its unique and extraordinary aspects. Once he mastered it, his foundation would completely transform. As for the technique on the second page of the life scroll, after reading it many times he still could not find its name. However, according to its attributes, he casually gave it a few names: Dust Scroll, Earth Scroll, Mud Scroll. Of course, after some consideration, he still felt that the Dust Scroll was slightly better. The last two names, he felt that something was wrong. Every time the Dust Scroll was activated, it could control the surrounding dust and sand. However, he had only cultivated for a short period of time, so he was still unable to control it skillfully. This scroll's attributes were relatively heavy, so it was much slower to activate compared to the life scroll. If he wanted to use it earlier, he would need to double up on his cultivation. Nay, nay, nay! Suddenly, the galloping horse neighed and raised its front leg, almost flipping the entire carriage over. Chapter 52. There was a huge gully in front of them. It looked like someone had cut it with a sword. It was difficult to move forward. Ning Chan got out of the carriage and walked towards the gully in his wheelchair. But he felt an extremely strong will coming towards him. It made his blood boil. Ning Chan was shocked. How could there be such a strong cultivator in the world who could imprint his will in the world and not dissipate for so long? He had seen many cultivators at the peak of the 9th rank, Qingning, Xiaomiaoyu and even God's son were all at that level. They were the strongest among them. But he knew that none of them could reach that level. Only a Xiantian cultivator could have such earth-shattering power. The gully had been there for a long time. The dust had turned black. In the world, only the supreme sword in Sword City could split the world with a single sword. Ningchen felt even more pressured. Everyone knew that the sword in Sword City hadn't reached the Xiantian level. But now it seemed that it wasn't because it didn't have the talent but because it didn't care. This sword showed that the sword in Sword City had already surpassed the limits of mortals. Even if it was bound by a physical body, it couldn't block that invincible sword intent. Ning Chun, who came from a foreign land, couldn't understand how a person's sword could reach such a terrifying level. It was no longer a person but a real sword. A sword that could compete with the world. No wonder all the swordsmen in the world only saw a sword in Huang City. The ink sword behind the wheelchair was trembling. It wanted to crawl in front of the supreme sword intent. Ning Chan held the ink sword and injected some vital energy into it to suppress the sword's trembling. Ink sword, since you're with me, you can't worship anyone or any sword. With a clang, the ink sword stopped trembling, as if it was responding to its master's command. Ning Chun got back into the carriage and took a detour. He didn't have the qualifications to cross the gully, but that day wasn't far away. He swore. 10 days later, Ning Chen's carriage was very close to Sword City. At the same time, a piece of news that shocked the entire Xia dynasty gradually spread. The 8th prince was dead. Among the 19 princes and princesses of the great Xia dynasty, there were only 4 people who had a chance to compete for the throne of Emperor Xia. The first prince was naturally one of them. The other 3 were the 3rd prince, the 8th prince, and the 10th prince. The 4 princes had already been bestowed the title of prince, and the 8th prince was known as the virtuous prince. He was the most likely person to inherit the throne after the first prince. Who would have thought that such a person would actually be assassinated? The incomparably valiant palm strike had completely shattered his heart meridians. Not long after returning to the palace, he had died from his injuries. Some people noticed that there was a conspiracy going on. Among the 4 princes, the first prince had the most hope. However, the first prince had always been magnanimous, upright, and distant. He did not have much attachment to the position of emperor. As such, there were only 3 people who truly cared about the throne. The 3 of them were wary of each other. They didn't dare to make any big moves. Everyone was worried that once they lost their momentum, the other 2 would join forces to suppress them. That was why it was said that a triangle was always the most stable relationship. But now, with the 8th prince's death, the triangle that was wary of each other instantly collapsed. The competition for the throne would definitely heat up very quickly. The remaining 2 no longer cared about who would join forces with who. It was just the east wind suppressing the west wind, or the west wind suppressing the east wind. Whoever was stronger would be able to suppress the other. As for the battle between the victor and the first prince, that was a matter for the future. While the great Xia dynasty was shaking in the distant west, the Son of God had passed through the number 1 shrine of Evernight and arrived at a vast and boundless sea of nothingness. Silver light reverberated between heaven and earth, forming a world of its own. Evernight scripture. The Son of God stretched out his hand, and an ancient scripture flickering with a black brilliance slowly descended from the void. It was as black as ink, and it was like a black hole that devoured the surrounding light. What are you looking for? At this time, a mighty figure walked over. His domineering aura caused the entire void to distort. Martial Lord. The Son of God bowed respectfully and said, I'm looking for information about the heavenly scripture. Oh, it seems you've gained something from this trip. The Martial Lord's eyes flashed with a strange light. The Evernight sect had many young champions, but he was most satisfied with Jun Shaoqing. He was neither arrogant nor rash, and he was persistent in doing things, just like his father in the past. I sensed the aura of the life scripture, the Son of God said. Oh, it's actually that. Hearing this news, the Martial Lord couldn't remain calm. Although the life scripture wasn't the strongest, it was the most special one. Of the 10 heavenly scriptures, life was the beginning, God was the venerable, chaos was the change, and nothingness was the end. The other 6 scriptures each had their own abilities, and they were the essence of the heavens and earth. The Son of God opened the Evernight scripture. This ancient scripture that recorded the countless years since the creation of Evernight erupted with a dazzling black light that devoured the heavens and earth. It was extremely shocking. The Evernight scripture was the light scripture of the 10 heavenly scriptures. Everything, including everything, was recorded within it. In the dazzling light, 10 large characters lined up in order. Life, light, moon, travel, earth, and chaos were already lit up. As for the remaining 4, they were still dim and couldn't be seen clearly. The martial lord looked at the 6 bright characters in the sky and narrowed his eyes. He said in surprise, "I didn't expect that 6 heavenly scriptures had already appeared." The Son of God nodded and said, "Of the 6 heavenly scriptures, the light and moon scriptures are in the Evernight sect, the travel scripture is in Sword City, and the chaos scripture is in the hands of that woman from the northern Meng imperial court. The whereabouts of the remaining 2 scriptures are unknown. However, I sensed the aura of the life scripture in the wedding procession of the Grand Xia. Although it was very brief, it can't be wrong." "Is there any news of the earth scripture?" the martial lord asked. "No." The Son of God shook his head. When the earth scripture had appeared, it had been too far away from the Evernight sect. Furthermore, it had been within the Grand Xia. It would have been very difficult for the Evernight sect's experts to arrive in time. The whereabouts of the other 2 heavenly scriptures were unknown, which wasn't good news for the Evernight sect. After the Evernight sect had created the world, the 10 heavenly scriptures had been scattered throughout the world. The Evernight sect had obtained 5 of them, and their power had been unparalleled for a time. However, as time passed, other than the Evernight divine scripture, the other 4 heavenly scriptures had been lost. Even the moon scripture that had been placed in the first shrine had only been retrieved 100 years ago. The Evernight sect's decline 1,000 years ago wasn't unrelated to the loss of the heavenly scriptures. Retrieving the remaining heavenly scriptures was extremely important to the Evernight sect. "Is it possible to find the whereabouts of the earth scripture in the Evernight divine scripture?" asked the martial lord. The Son of God waved his hand, and his true chi surged out and entered the Evernight divine scripture. After a long time, he shook his head and said, "I can't find it." The martial lord frowned. Ever since the chaos scripture had appeared, the Evernight divine scripture's usefulness had become more and more limited. Unfortunately, that woman from the northern Meng imperial court still had some value. The Son of God narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. "Martial lord, I almost forgot to mention that the underworld child has also awakened." "Oh? That rumored variable from the netherworld hell?" The martial lord's expression turned cold. It seemed like this really was a sign of chaos. Even that madman had awakened. The underworld child and the ghost woman were a pair of variables from the netherworld hell. They were extremely powerful, and when they joined hands, they could contend against a Xiantian expert. However, this generation's underworld child was a madman. Whether it was the degree of absurdity or his talent, he far surpassed any of the previous underworld children. In this world, the only person who could contend against the underworld child was the ghost woman. Apart from her, even a Xiantian expert would find it difficult to kill the underworld child who had come out of the netherworld hell. In this world, there would always be some special people. Their life and death wouldn't be decided simply by strength. The underworld child and the ghost woman came from the netherworld hell. They balanced each other out, but they also complemented each other. Apart from their strength, the most difficult thing to deal with was their nearly unkillable netherworld ghost body. Tomorrow, make a trip to the Sword City in the east. I have already accepted that person's sword-proving battle. However, before that, you should go and fight with the new Xiantian expert in the Sword City. This will help you comprehend the Xiantian realm. As he spoke, the martial lord didn't hide his eagerness for the battle. Warriors were born for battle. The eternal night cult had been silent for too long. If they continued to hide their edge, they would be completely forgotten by the world. The god's son nodded. He had been stuck at the peak of the postliminary realm for a long time. He had vaguely taken a step forward, but he couldn't really take it. He really needed a battle to stimulate himself. On the wasteland, the galloping carriage gradually slowed down. After half a day, an ancient city could be vaguely seen. However, this wasn't the Sword City. Instead, it was the last city in the east of the Great Xia Empire, Matchless City. Matchless City was located on the only road that connected the east and the west. It was extremely prosperous. The walls of the entire ancient city were made of strange ancient wood and metal. Sabers, forks, swords, and halberds had left marks on them. One could vaguely see the fierce battles of the past. Since ancient times, it had been one of the impregnable passes of the Central Plains. No one knew how long it had been there, but it still stood firm and upright in the divine continent. Ning Chun entered the city and casually found an inn to stay in. He had almost run out of money, so he had no choice but to deal with it. Chopping firewood was too slow, so robbing people wasn't too suitable. He could only go out and try his luck. He knew a bit of martial arts, so fighting in a ring wasn't a problem. This wasn't a problem at first, but now it had become a hindrance to his progress. He felt somewhat helpless. Warriors were also humans, and they also needed to eat. Since ancient times, things like rings were quite common. Matchless City naturally didn't lack one. Ning Chun was like a wolf that had seen a fat piece of meat. After seeing it from afar, he rushed there as if his life depended on it. There was a fluttering banner in front of him that had 2 words written on it. Ring. In his eyes, this was silver, this was bread. After squeezing through the crowd with great difficulty, Ning Chun didn't say anything and slapped his wheelchair to get up. On the opposite side of the ring was a middle-aged man in green clothes. He had a beard and a jade-like face. It could be seen that he must have been a handsome man when he was young. Even though he was old now, he could still charm many infatuated girls. Ning Chun hated handsome men the most, especially those who were more handsome than him. The middle-aged man looked at the young man who came up and frowned unconsciously. How could he be a cripple? Have you read the rules? The middle-aged man asked worriedly. Rules? Ning Chun was a little dumbfounded. What rules? Wasn't it just fighting in a ring? There were rules. Wait, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He glanced around, and when he saw a spirited young girl vaguely sitting behind the curtain of the ring, his mind went blank. He was careless and forgot that there was a kind of ring in this world called a martial arts competition to find a spouse. Ning Chun grinned and laughed foolishly. He apologized. I came to the wrong place. I'm sorry. No matter if it was true or not, he couldn't stay any longer. It was better to be safe than sorry. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned his wheelchair and was about to go down. There was no way he could earn this money. Otherwise, he would have to pay for it. Wait. At this moment, the young girl behind the gauze curtain stood up. She had a pretty face, but there was a rudeness that made people dislike her. Ning Chun pretended that he didn't hear her. He turned his wheelchair and was about to go down the stairs. I'm calling you. Didn't you hear me? The young girl was furious. She waved the long whip in her hand and slapped it towards Ning Chun. The sudden disaster made Ning Chun a little unhappy. He just came to the wrong place and apologized. Why did he have to be whipped? Even Zhongsun didn't let him be whipped. Why did this woman? Chapter 53. Ning Chun was very angry. Who did he offend? Was it a big mistake to go the wrong way? If it weren't for the fact that she was a girl, he would have beaten her up. He turned his wheelchair and dodged the whip. Ning Chun continued to prepare. He comforted himself that he was a man and couldn't argue with a girl. Slap. The girl became even angrier after her whip missed. The whip in her hand whistled and she didn't give up. Ning Chun heard the wind in his ears and his body began to tremble. He reached out and grabbed the whip. He endured it and suppressed the anger in his heart. He swung it casually, but he endured it again. She was young and inexperienced, so he couldn't be petty. Slap. He dodged the whip that came flying at him. Slap. He dodged the whip that flew towards him. Slap, slap, slap. After countless whips, Ning Chun finally became angry. He suddenly turned around and stared at the unruly girl in front of him. His anger burned the 9 heavens. You're not done yet. He decided not to endure it any longer. A good man shouldn't fight with a girl. He had enough. He moved his wheelchair and instantly crossed the distance of 3 feet. He flipped his right palm and pressed it toward the girl's chest. The girl was shocked and even angrier. She held the whip with both hands and blocked her chest. However, she couldn't block the huge force. Her blood and chi surged, and she was forced to retreat several steps. Ning Chan still held back. Or else this palm wouldn't have just made her retreat a few steps. He was angry, but he didn't lose his mind. He only used 10% of his palm and held back 70%. He only wanted to teach this unruly girl a lesson. The whip in the girl's hand swung again. Slap. It was extremely loud. Ning Chan sneered. If he was hit by this lousy whip, then he was really asking for a beating. He grabbed the incoming whip and pulled it hard. The girl's palm hurt, and the whip immediately fell out of her hand. The gap between their strength couldn't be made up. In her anger, the girl didn't care about anything else. She shouted at the people below, "Beat him! Everyone, 10 taels of silver!" The crowd below was excited and rushed up like a tide. 10 taels of silver wasn't a small amount. It was enough to feed an ordinary family for several months. The girl retreated and angrily stared at Ning Chan. She wanted to see how he would embarrass himself. At the side, the middle-aged man frowned, but he didn't stop the young girl from messing around. From the move just now, he could tell that the young man before him wasn't simple. In the center of the arena, Ning Chan looked at the surrounding crowd and sighed softly. Indeed, money makes the world go round. When would he be able to be so generous? There's nothing I can do. With a helpless sigh, Ning Chan fully unleashed his aura. Silver brilliance surged and turned into a huge force that instantly pushed everyone on the stage away. What a powerful foundation! The middle-aged man's pupils constricted. The youth in front of him did not have a high cultivation, but his foundation was exceptionally tyrannical. The strength of his true chi was enough to rival a 5th stage post-celestial stage expert. After all, level 5 was the first hurdle of martial arts. There was a huge gap between level 4 and level 5. He had never heard of anyone who could have such strong genuine chi at level 4. Ning Chan didn't care about it, but unknowingly, the effect of the life scroll was gradually revealed. Among the 10 scrolls of Heavenly Book, life is the beginning. It was the only scroll that didn't require one to reach the post-celestial stage to cultivate both mental cultivation methods and moves. It was unparalleled in terms of tempering one's foundation. Even the other heavenly books couldn't compare to it. The key to fighting was either to be able to hit or to be able to endure. The key to being able to endure was even simpler. Thick skin, thick flesh, high blood, and resistance to beatings. The life scroll that Mu Changshua gave him was exactly this. Therefore, Ning Chan received many injuries. Although he lost an arm or a leg and was crippled, he survived in the end. The middle-aged man was someone who had seen the world, but the girl wasn't. Originally, she only wanted to teach this brat a lesson, but now she changed her mind. Ada Aira-san go. Yes, princess. With 3 whooshing sounds, 3 men holding swords appeared on the arena and surrounded Ning Chan. Their expressions were unfriendly. Ning Chen's eyes became serious. When he heard the 2 words princess, he knew that things were going to be bad. His luck was so bad that he could meet a member of the imperial family while casually fighting. He reckoned that this unruly girl's father was either an idiot or had a screw loose. How could he allow his daughter to cause trouble like this? A princess setting up an arena was too absurd. They were both princesses, but the difference between Xia Miaoyu and this unruly girl was like heaven and earth. Today he had bumped into great luck. Thinking about the sword, the wind from the swords came. The 3 men attacked with surging genuine chi. They were all experts of the 5th stage realm. Warriors were not as common as cabbages in this world. Experts who could cross the level 5 realm were not everywhere. This unruly girl could summon 3 of them with a casual shout, which really made people feel very uncomfortable. Ning Chan was envious, jealous, and even hateful. But there was nothing he could do. She was a princess and he was a eunuch. Bah, he wasn't a eunuch. With a clang, the ink sword was unsheathed. It blocked the long sword in one of the men's hands easily. Then it changed its direction and knocked away the second sword. At the same time, the third sword light had arrived in front of him. Ning Chen's left hand sword fingers trembled. With the help of the dark yellow light, he avoided the sword edge and knocked away the third sword with 2 fingers. After defeating 3 enemies with 1 move, Ning Chan rushed forward. The ink sword was like snow, and it chopped at the nearest man. Facing 3 people together, he was always at a disadvantage. Plus, he didn't have an advantage in cultivation. If he kept being passive, he would be defeated eventually. Clang! Asan raised his sword to block. When his sword momentum was trapped, the ink sword changed its trajectory again and revealed an opening behind him. Asan swung the sword at Ada. Ada moved his eyes and stepped back to avoid the ink sword. Aer's sword light was reflected in his eyes. The opening became Aer's target. Ning Chen's sword momentum was exhausted, so it was hard for him to defend. At the edge of the arena, the middle-aged man was about to stop Aer. However, before he opened his mouth, he closed it immediately. Aer's sword did not welcome an opening, but a swift and fierce dark arrow. Ning Chen was not the kind of person who would expose his back to his opponents. Especially after his legs were disabled, he didn't like strangers standing behind him. The dark arrow on his back was something that even the wheelchair he retired in earlier had, not to mention this one. Aer's sword clashed with the dark arrow, making an ear-piercing sound. After a short moment, the ink sword was chasing after his life. Aer's eyes shrank. He instinctively leaned to one side. Then he saw blood splattering everywhere. The ink sword had pierced through his right arm. Clang! The long sword fell. Aer's body froze. He couldn't react in time. Ada and Asan looked angry. They moved their bodies and were about to attack again. However, they were stopped by a calm shout. Stop! It was the middle-aged man who shouted. This battle couldn't continue. Otherwise, the consequences would be hard to deal with. He could tell that the young man in front of him was not a soft-hearted person. That sword attack was obviously real. If the battle continued, someone would definitely fall today. Third uncle. Xianyini was dissatisfied. She didn't understand why her third uncle wanted to stop this battle. Shut up! Yan Qinhuang shouted coldly. Xianyini was startled. Her face was filled with fear. She knew that although her third uncle doted on her, once he was angry, he would not recognize anyone. Even her father didn't dare to provoke him. You name. Yan Qinhuang walked up and asked seriously. Ning Chan. Ning Chan honestly reported his name. It wasn't that he was stupid, but that he had guessed the other party's identity. The current Xia emperor had 4 brothers. One was Hua Qinhuang in the imperial city, one was Yu Qinhuang in Nanjiang, and the last was the unruly girl's father, Tai Qinhuang, whose fief was in Wushuang city. As for the middle-aged man in front of him, he must be the third-ranked Yan Qinhuang. Yan Qinhuang had no children. He was free and unfettered. He wasn't restricted by power, so he was the freest of the 4 Qinhuang. As for the other 3 Qinhuang, whether it was Yu Qinhuang or Yan Qinhuang, although they had their own fiefs, it was no different from house arrest. The reason was simple. Both Qinhuang's fiefs were overseen by a Marquis of the Xia dynasty. As for Hua Qinhuang, it was needless to say. He had been trapped in the imperial city his entire life. In comparison, Yan Qinhuang was much freer. The Xia emperor was very lenient to this brother of his. Ning Chen knew about Yan Qinhuang because Zhang Sun and Yan Qinhuang had a good relationship. It was said that Zhang Sun had almost been betrothed to Yan Qinhuang by the previous emperor. He didn't ask what the truth was. No one in this world dared to gossip about Zhang Sun. He didn't have the guts. However, he was sure that Zhang Sun trusted Yan Qinhuang. Yan Qinhuang walked up to Ning Chen. After a long time he asked, "That little eunuch by Wu You's side?" Ning Chen smiled bitterly and nodded. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get rid of his identity as a eunuch. You escaped. Yan Qinhuang continued. Yes. Ning Chen nodded again. You not bad. Yan Qinhuang gave the highest praise. He didn't fight, but that didn't mean he didn't know anything. He understood the current Xia emperor. People like Ning Chen would either be used or die. There was no third result. Ning Chen smiled embarrassedly. Yan Qinhuang is too kind. Yan Qinhuang nodded and turned to look at his unruly niece. Niani, apologize. Ning Chen's expression changed. He felt great inside. Little guy, who asked you to be so arrogant? If he didn't have some skills, he would be lying here today. This Yan Qinhuang was really good. On the other side, Xianyeni's expression was one of disbelief. She ignored her fear and said, You want me to apologize to him? Why? Because he protected by Ruo Yuan of the Xia dynasty. Because he won back 20,000 horses for the Xia dynasty. Because he sacrificed his legs to escort Miaoyu. As he spoke, Yan Qinhuang's expression became colder and colder. The strong pressure made Xian Yin's face turn pale. She struggled and stepped forward as if her legs were filled with lead. I'm sorry. Xian Yin's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. She turned around and her eyes turned red. She was about to cry. Ningchen felt great, but he also didn't feel good. Now it seemed like this unruly girl was the one who was wronged. He was the victim. It's okay. He decided to accept the apology calmly. Guilt and whatnot really didn't suit him at all. Xian Yin was so angry that she almost suffered internal injuries. For a moment, she forgot about her grievances and glared at the former. She wished she could eat his flesh. Ningchen turned his head and didn't look at her. Why did you look at me and I look at you? You're not good looking. In fact, Xian Yin was quite pretty. She had delicate features and was a little unruly, but she was young and charming. However, Ningchen's taste had already been spoiled by Mu Changxue, Qingning, and the others. He wasn't interested in a green apple like Xian Yin. Let's go. We've messed around enough. It's time to go back. Ningchen, you come with us. Yin Qinhuang glanced at the two, then turned and walked off the stage. He walked out of the crowd. Ningchen turned his wheelchair and followed, ignoring the unruly girl who was still glaring at him. Little guy, I'll anger you to death. Chapter 54. On the way back, Prince Yin glanced at Ningchen and Xian Yin, who was dawdling. He frowned and said, help push it. Ningchen and Xian Yin's expressions changed. They were both unwilling, but under Prince Yan's influence, no one dared to object. After Xian Yin got on the wheelchair, her expression was so fierce that it could scare people to death. Ningchen felt a chill down his spine and felt uncomfortable all over. I can do it myself. Ningchen couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was afraid that this unruly girl wouldn't be able to resist stabbing him. At such a close distance he couldn't dodge even if he wanted to. Let her push it, Prince Yin rejected. I'm helping you push it, and you still dare to refuse? Hearing the unwillingness in Ningchen's tone, Xian Yin's anger rose. She could refuse, but this guy couldn't. She was already angry enough today. If third uncle wasn't here, she would definitely throw this guy into the river to feed the fish. Ningchen, shut up. A good man didn't fight with an evil woman. No matter how good one's martial arts were, they were still afraid of being stabbed. Now that they were under someone else's roof, he didn't dare to provoke this unruly girl. If she really stabbed him, who could he reason with? The three of them slowly walked forward. When the commoners in the city saw them, they all retreated and bowed. Prince Yin had a very high prestige in the entire Xia kingdom. His talent and martial arts were extraordinary. If it weren't for his uncompetitive nature, the current emperor's position might have been different. The current Emperor Xia's throne was largely due to Prince Yan's abdication. It was said that the previous Emperor Xia was particularly fond of Prince Yan, who was outstanding in both talent and martial arts. He wanted to make him the crown prince, but Prince Yan refused. This was also why the current Xia emperor was so cold to his own brother, but so kind to Prince Yan. Ningchen found it hard to believe that this prince who didn't even want the throne would be interested in fooling around with this unruly girl. Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered that he actually didn't know what the arena was for. All these thoughts were just his guesses. Curious, Ningchen slanted his head and glanced at the unruly girl. He whispered, Princess, may I ask something? What is it? Xian Yin asked suspiciously. Their relationship wasn't that good, and the word please made her feel a bit uncomfortable. This fellow couldn't be plotting something, right? Ningchen saw the emotions in the unruly girl's eyes, but he didn't argue with her. He wanted to finish his questions first. Compared to his burning desire for gossip, personal grudges could be put aside first. Why did you set up the arena just now? Ningchen thought for a while, but he couldn't figure out how to be tactful. So he asked directly. Don't you know? Xian Yin's expression was a bit strange as she mocked. He didn't even know what was going on, yet he dared to challenge her. What was this fellow's brain made of? Hearing the unruly girl's disdain, Ningchen scratched his head embarrassedly. He must have gone mad from poverty. When he saw the arena, he immediately jumped onto it, afraid that he would run away if he was late. Xian Yin didn't notice Ningchen's awkward expression. She continued, Third uncle needs a sword attendant, so he set a rule. Whoever can withstand 10 moves can go with him. After saying that, Xian Yini looked at Ning Chan suspiciously. Then what did you think it was? Nothing. Ning Chan quickly turned his head, not letting the unruly girl see his awkward expression. So the one with a cannon in his head wasn't Imperial Prince Tai, but him. The princess was holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. What was he thinking? He really admired himself for even being able to think of such a nonsensical thing. He thought you were holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. At this time, Imperial Prince Yen indifferently added another blow, causing the two people behind him to be stupefied. Ning Chan had never thought that Imperial Prince Yen had been listening to their conversation the entire time. He also didn't think that Imperial Prince Yen even knew what he was thinking. Could it be that he had written his answer on his face? But how could he say it out loud? How could he say it out loud? However, compared to Ning Chen's anger, Xian Yini was so shocked that her mouth couldn't close. In the next moment she completely exploded. In her anger, she grabbed his neck and viciously squeezed it. Am I so disdainful? She had thought that Ning Chan had said a few words before turning around to cause trouble. She hadn't thought it was actually because he saw her. Ning Chan was having difficulty breathing. He tried to pry Xian Yini's hand away while struggling to say, Princess, princess, don't be impulsive. Imperial Prince Yen was just joking. Xian Yini didn't believe him and squeezed even harder. She wanted to strangle this brat to death. The world was big, but it couldn't compare to this guy's courage. He actually dared to disdain her. Ning Chen's face was completely red. He felt that he couldn't breathe. With great effort he said, Princess, you are a princess. No matter how stupid I am, I wouldn't let my imagination run wild like this. Really? Xian Yini suspiciously released her hand. Thinking about it, it made sense. How could someone be so stupid to think like this? No matter what, she was still a princess of Xia. Her marriage was decided by Emperor Xia. No matter how bad it was, it wouldn't degenerate to the point of holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Ning Chen's extremely powerful imagination. For a transmigrator whose worldview was gradually collapsing, it wasn't impossible for him to think that pigs could fly. More importantly, when she went on stage, only a ghost would know her identity as a princess. Cough cough, it's true. Ning Chan rubbed his throat as he hurriedly nodded. At the same time, he was constantly complaining about Prince Yen. It was fine if you guessed it yourself. Why did you have to say it out loud? What if he couldn't help but beat up this unruly girl? Although he had a lot of opinions about Xian Yini, he didn't plan on offending her too much. This was his eldest grandson's niece. Even if he didn't give face to the monk, he still had to give face to the Buddha. Prince Yen smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. After a short interlude, the three continued to walk forward. Prince Yen walked in front with an indifferent expression. Step by step he walked at a steady pace. His plain green robes fluttered in the wind. He was calm and noble. Truly stylish. Ning Chan sighed in his heart. This Prince Yen wasn't an ordinary person. Just his peerless demeanor left others in the dust. It was no wonder that his eldest grandson was almost betrothed to this talented third master. Unfortunately, Prince Yen had never taken a wife in his entire life. Countless unmarried daughters of court officials had waited foolishly until their hearts were broken. This was a legend of the Grand Xia, a legend who had lived in this era. Compared to him, the Xia emperor who had finally ascended the throne was much less charismatic. He didn't know what had happened between the previous generation of the Grand Xia's princes. Although the current Xia emperor had ascended the throne, he had lost all his brothers. As for Prince Yen, although he had refused the throne, he had received the respect of all the princes. Prince Tai's residence. When the three of them arrived, Prince Tai was sitting in the main seat. Seeing Prince Yen return, he put down his teacup and stood up. Xian Yini walked into the hall and saw her father. She immediately ignored Ning Chan and walked over with a sweet smile. Father, I'm back. Prince Tai chuckled, a doting expression on his face. You didn't cause any trouble for your third uncle, did you? How could I? Your daughter is the most obedient, said Xian Yini cutely. Ning Chan was speechless. She didn't even blush when she lied. If you didn't cause any trouble, then how did I end up here? Did I pick you up on the road? He really wanted to shout that I was the one who caused all this trouble. Prince Tai understood his daughter the best. He knew that at most he could believe a third of what she said. He looked at Prince Yen and asked, "Third brother, Niani didn't cause any trouble for you, right?" Xia Niani immediately looked at her third uncle. Her meaning was that if he didn't nod, she would cry in front of him. Prince Yen wasn't threatened by the former, but he still shook his head. No. In his eyes, what had happened just now couldn't be considered trouble. At most it was just two children fighting in a fit of pique. Prince Tai nodded slightly when he heard this. Then, he shifted his gaze towards the young man before him and asked, "You are?" "Ningchan, Wuyo's subordinate," introduced Prince Yen. "Greetings, Prince Tai." Ningchan cupped his hands. No need for formalities. Prince Tai was a bit surprised. Why had this person come to Wuxia City? He was no stranger to Ningchen's matters. It could be said that the 3 matches between the Grand Xia and the true Extreme Nation had been this little eunuch's personal performance. However, later on, he had been thrown off a cliff by the Eternal Night Church's godchild on the way to the bride's wedding. His whereabouts had been unknown ever since. Wuxia City was a bit far from the Imperial City. His spies couldn't have the same information as the palace spirits in the Imperial City. Thus, Prince Tai didn't know that Ningchan had entered the academy. However, Prince Tai didn't care about this. He didn't want to care about the Imperial City's matters. "Third brother, how was it? Did you find a sword attendant that satisfied you?" "Him." Prince Yen calmly pointed at Ningchan. "Oh." Prince Tai narrowed his eyes. His body moved, and he drew his sword from the sword rack and slashed at the youth. Ningchen's pupil shrank. He didn't dodge or retreat. His sword came out of its sheath, and he didn't hesitate to use a move that would injure both of them. Bang! Prince Tai turned his sword around and placed it in front of him. Pung! The 2 men's clothes began to flutter from the shockwave. Not bad. Prince Tai put away his sword and praised. Not only was he ruthless to his enemy, but he was even more ruthless to himself. There was a difference in strength between the two. If it had been a real battle, choosing to injure both of them would have been the only correct way. In a battle between the strong and the weak had a slim chance of winning. Once they had misgivings, they would lose even faster. Ningchan was a bit unhappy, extremely unhappy. He wasn't a thing and didn't like to be casually tested by others. He hated this kind of high and mighty attitude. Perhaps Prince Tai didn't feel it himself, but that was what he showed. "Prince Tai, Prince Yen, thank you for your praise. However, I'm not interested in a sword attendant. Moreover, I still have things to do. Goodbye." After saying that, Ningchan turned his wheelchair and was about to leave. He came here for the sake of Zhang's son. Otherwise, no one would be able to force him. Although he cherished his life, it wasn't to the extent that he could give up everything for it. As a descendant of China, his life could be lost, but his dignity was priceless. Chapter 55. Ningchen's pride was hidden deep in his bones and deeply engraved in his bones. His usual shyness, agreeableness, and even his thick skin were just an optimistic attitude towards this damned fate. If he was really pushed to the brink, he would rather be reborn. Dying once would not make a difference if he had to do it again. Wait! At this moment, Yin Imperial Prince spoke. His calm expression had turned gloomy ever since he unsheathed his sword. Ningchen stopped. The stubbornness and arrogance in his eyes were no longer concealed. Yin Imperial Prince turned around and looked at Qin Imperial Prince beside him. "Second brother, I brought Ningchan here so he's my guest. Your probing just now made me unhappy." Yin Imperial Prince took 2 steps forward and looked at the youth in front of him. "Ningchan, Qin Imperial Prince is my elder brother, so I can't ask him to apologize. However, as I said just now, I brought you here so you're my guest. If I offended you in any way, I'll apologize to you." Ningchan narrowed his eyes, hiding his emotions. Yin Imperial Prince's extraordinariness surprised him once again. Other than his talent and martial arts, his bearing was also unparalleled in the world. No wonder everyone in the world saw Yin Imperial Prince as the legend of Wuxia. This living legend indeed had a perfection that left others in the dust. Once, he had told Li that any perfection was a lie waiting to be exposed. Today he took back those words. He couldn't see any flaws in Yin Imperial Prince. There might be inadequacies or regrets, but he definitely wasn't a flaw. Ningqian also apologizes for my rudeness just now. Ningqian lowered his head and bowed. Then what about the sword attendant? Yin Imperial Prince's expression softened slightly. In his eyes, Ningqian was indeed the most suitable candidate. Other than him, he also trusted Jiangsuan's judgment. Hearing Yin Imperial Prince mention the sword attendant again, Ningqian sighed softly and said honestly, I do have something to do. I hope Imperial Prince can find someone better. What is it? Yin Imperial Prince asked stubbornly. Ningqian was startled. He didn't understand why Yin Imperial Prince had to choose him. After thinking about it, he said honestly, I'm going to Sword City to see someone. Hearing the two words Sword City, Yin Imperial Prince frowned. Must you go? Must go. Ningqian nodded and replied. He had traveled thousands of miles to come here, so he definitely wouldn't give up before seeing Mu Chengxue. Prince Yin pondered for a moment and said slowly, I will go with you on the condition that you become my sword attendant. He knew how dangerous Sword City was. If Ningqian went there alone, he might not be able to come out alive. Ningqian was tempted and asked how long. 10 years, said Prince Yan. Impossible. Ningqian rejected without hesitation. 10 years was too long. Even if the other party was Prince Yan, he could not give up 10 years of freedom. Speak. Prince Yan frowned again and gave him the most leniency. 1 year, Ningqian said firmly. Prince Yan thought that a year was too short, but he really needed a sword attendant. Sure. In the end, Prince Yan nodded and officially reached an agreement with Ningqian. From this day onwards, Ningqian became the person who carried the sword for Yanqing Prince. The term was 1 year and there was no turning back. Prince Yan had 4 swords in a sword rack. Ningqian had a wheelchair, so he carried it on his wheelchair. Of the 4 swords, 2 were green and red, 1 was blue, and the last one was deeply embedded. He could not pull it out. These 4 were not ordinary swords. Green and red, 1 was cold and 1 was hot. Blue was soft and rippling. Ningqian could not feel any aura from the last one, but he feared it the most. Prince Yan, Ningqian said. He felt awkward when he spoke. Prince Yan frowned. Ningqian was going to follow him for a long time, so he could not keep calling him Prince Yan. In the past he had always been alone. Now that there was one more person, he had to think of a new way to address him. Just call me Senior. After thinking for a moment, Prince Yan relaxed his frown and said casually. Speaking of which, Ningqian had been with Zhang Sun for a while, so he deserved to be called Senior. Ningqian called him that secretly, feeling much better than calling him Prince Yan. Senior, when can we leave for Sword City? Tonight, but before that, come with me to get a sword. King Yan said as he strode forward. Ningqian was stunned, then turned his wheelchair and followed. The Silver Garden was a beautiful place to welcome guests in Wuxia City's City Lord's mansion. It was located above a heavenly spring, and it was as warm as spring all year round. Pear blossoms drifted down like snow. Wuxia City was different from other places in the Central Plains. It had existed for far too long and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties in the Central Plains. Its origins were shockingly ancient. It was said that Wuxia City was behind the rise of the Granxia. After the founding of the Granxia Emperor allowed the city lord's bloodline to be hereditary. 1,000 years had passed and many things had changed. The only thing that did not change was the strength of Wuxia City. Under the heavens, no one would look down on this ancient place that had not declined. The city lord's bloodline was a transcendent existence in Wuxia City. The Granxia had sent a martial Marquis here not only to intimidate Sword City in the east, but also for other reasons. Today, in this beautiful silver court, they welcomed a distinguished guest. This person was naturally not Ningqian, but the number 1 person of the Granxia's younger generation, Yin Maxiao. It was rumored that Yin Maxiao had been taken in as a personal disciple by one of the 3 dukes, Duke Shiyu. It was only a matter of time before he would be granted the title of Marquis. Amidst the snow in the Silver Garden, Peerless City Master sat quietly on the main seat. He was dressed in a purple court robe with a golden spider belt of the same color around his waist. His black hair was tied up and fixed with a jade-green gilt crown. His slender body was straight and his words were calm without losing his bearing. On one side, the wife of the city lord was wearing a noble robe and was toasting with a smile. On the other side, Qin Wushuang's beautiful eyes moved and glanced at Yin Ma Xiao from the corner of his eyes. Anyone could see the affection in his eyes. All the heroes sat down and drank to their heart's content. The titans of the 10 places had brought the most outstanding people of the younger generation and represented the top strength of each place. However, at this moment, an uninvited guest slowly walked over. Behind him, he brought his newly recruited sword servant. Ningchen felt helpless. He was not here to cause trouble. He was only here to carry a sword. Prince Yan, the Wushuang city lord, stood up with an ugly expression. This Prince Yan had come to steal his sword. I am here to take the sword. Prince Yan opened his mouth and said these words without any threat. However, it had changed the expression of all the major figures at the scene. Everyone knew that the Wushuang city lord had a family treasure sword called Zhiga. It was in this silver garden. The Zhiga sword was bestowed by the second generation Xia Emperor 1,000 years ago. It was a rare heavy sword and also the emperor's sword. In the past, the Wushuang city's internal strife had continued for many years and the people had suffered greatly. The second generation Xia Emperor had bestowed the emperor's sword and allowed the Wushuang city lord to borrow 100,000 soldiers from nearby to quell the chaos. However, as soon as the internal strife was quelled and before the emperor's sword could be retrieved, the second generation Xia Emperor had passed away due to illness. Immediately, the Wushuang city lord took this opportunity to bury the Zhiga sword in the silver garden. From then on, they lied to the outside world that the emperor's sword had been lost in the chaos. This was a secret that everyone knew. However, no one had exposed it. 10 days ago, Prince Yan had sent someone to deliver a letter to the city lord's residence. The content was very simple. Either the Qin family would send the sword or he would come to take it himself. Everyone knew that Prince Yan treasured swords and was good at them. Because of this, the Xia Emperor had ordered that Prince Yan could choose any sword that belonged to the imperial court or the royal family. Prince Yan, you have come to the wrong place. I don't have the sword you want. Facing the major figures and the disciples of the 3 chancellors, the Wushuang city lord naturally wouldn't admit that the Zhiga sword was in Wushuang city. Prince Yan ignored him and walked forward step by step. He released his qi to sense the sword. It is indeed below. After 10 steps, Prince Yan stopped and muttered to himself, Prince Yan, you are going too far. Men, take them away. Facing Prince Yan's disregard, the Wushuang city lord's expression became very ugly. He slapped the table in front of him and shouted, yes. As soon as he finished speaking, 12 guards dressed in iron armor appeared. Without saying a word, they surrounded the 2 of them. Ningchen frowned. He could see that these guards weren't ordinary people. Their qi was long and the weakest one was at the peak of the 4th stage of the Hotian realm. To him, dealing with one of them wasn't a problem. He could barely protect himself against 2 of them and 3 of them would definitely be defeated. As for the strongest ones, their qi was much higher than his, so he couldn't tell. Prince Yan looked indifferent. He took a step forward and his powerful qi spread out, knocking away the 12 iron cloak guards who had surrounded him. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. He knew that Prince Yan was very strong, but he didn't expect him to be this strong. These years, Prince Yan had hidden too much of his talent. Gradually, people forgot that this legendary martial artist of the Xia dynasty was as rare as his talent. Elder Fengyu. The Wushuang city lord's heart sank. Whoosh whoosh. 2 dazzling sword lights, 2 terrifying presences, pierced mercilessly towards Prince Yan. It's them. Some of the magnates recognized their qi. These were 2 powerful martial artists who had been famous for almost 100 years. They had been stuck at the peak of the 9th stage for a long time and their qi was unfathomable. No one expected them to be recruited by the Qin clan. Facing the 2 powerful elders of Wushuang city, Prince Yan waved his hand. The green and red swords flew out from the sword rack. He held them with both hands and faced Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu. Boom! The 4 swords clashed, causing the sky to be filled with flying flowers. The cold rain condensed into frost, and the wind element was fire. The 4 elements clashed, causing water, fire, wind, and frost to surge. Finally, it turned into a storm, causing everyone to retreat. Not bad, Prince Yan said lightly. He turned his swords and pushed Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu away. With two bangs, Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu steadied themselves. Their faces were solemn. They knew that they had met a strong enemy this time. The two of them, one on the left and one on the right, rushed forward again. Their sword moves were coordinated, and their attack and defense were in sync. They were fighting against the legends of the Xia dynasty. Prince Yan's expression was calm. His body was like a willow, and his two swords moved gracefully. For a moment the two of them had no way to attack. The people in the battle were shocked, and the people outside the battle were even more shocked. Who would have thought that the prince of the Xia dynasty was so powerful? Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu couldn't win after a long battle. They pushed their cultivation to the limit. Suddenly the space shook, and their moves became even more vicious. Prince Yan was not shocked or afraid. His expression was still calm. He waved his green sword and frost condensed. The moment the two swords clashed, it trapped Elder Fengyu's sword. In the next moment, Prince Yan's red sword pushed Elder Fengyu away. He then followed up with a slash. Blood spurted out. Elder Fengyu's arm was cut off from the shoulder, and blood spurted out. However, Prince Yan didn't stop there. He moved his feet and appeared in front of Elder Fengyu. He held his green sword with his left hand and pointed it at Elder Fengyu's energy center. Bang! With a groan, Elder Fengyu flew backward. The qi in his body was in a mess, and half of his cultivation was gone. I have given you a chance. I hope you will cherish it, Prince Yan warned coldly. Immediately, the green and red swords in his hands disappeared. They turned into two rays of light and flew back into the sword rack. Chapter 56. The green and red swords returned to their scabbards. Everyone was silent. Prince Yan's power shocked everyone. Two peak rank 9 cultivators had been defeated without any resistance. Ningqian was also shocked speechless. He had seen many battles between rank 9 cultivators, but this was the first time he had seen such an overwhelming difference in power. In the guest seat, Yin Maxiao's eyes flashed with battle intent. After a while he suppressed it. It was not yet time for him to challenge the current legend of the Xia dynasty. Prince Yan's power made the Wushuang city master's face turn pale. He had never thought that Feng and Yu would be defeated so thoroughly. Only 20 years had passed, but the legend of the Xia dynasty had surpassed everyone in his generation. He had walked very far on the path of martial arts. Boom! While everyone was still in shock, Prince Yan walked to the center of the Silver Garden. He exerted force with his feet. Immediately there was a loud rumbling sound. A bottomless crack appeared on the ground. How dare you! The sudden tremor woke up the powerful existence deep in Wushuang City. A terrifying aura pressed down from the sky, trying to stop Prince Yan from taking the sword. Prince Yan snorted coldly. The vital energy around him shot up into the sky. Then with a boom, the aura in the sky dissipated and returned to nothingness. Even if you come out now, you can't stop me from taking the sword. I will take the Zhiga sword today. Prince Yan flipped his right hand and a vast suction force appeared. He slowly pulled the Zhiga sword out from the crack in the ground. The dark gold Zhiga sword appeared. Immediately, waves of heavy pressure spread out. This sword had been buried deep in the Silver Garden for thousands of years. It had absorbed too much qi of the earth, making the already heavy sword feel like it was weighed down by 1,000 pounds. Prince Yan pointed with his finger and sealed most of the qi of the earth. Then he waved his hand and a dark gold light flashed. Another sword appeared in the sword rack behind Ningqian. Crack! The wheelchair sank half an inch into the ground, crushing the blue stone floor below. You're going too far. In the depths of Wushuang City, a powerful consciousness quickly awakened. Just as it was about to break out, it was stopped by another aura. Let him go. It's just a heavy sword. It's not worth fighting over. Humph! The will from before snorted coldly. Then it gradually retracted its aura and calmed down once more. On the main seat, the city lord of Peerless City clenched his fists so tightly that his veins popped out, but he was powerless to stop it. Even the old ancestor had spoken, what else could he say? Let's go. Prince Yan glanced at Ningqian and turned to walk out of the silver garden. His steps were steady and no one dared to stop him. It's so hot that it's about to explode. Ningqian sighed softly, then struggled to turn his wheelchair and follow. From then on, he became a die-hard fan of Prince Yan. However, this gigasword was really heavy. Outside the city lord's mansion, Ningqian looked at Prince Yan in front of him and asked curiously, "Senior, have you already stepped into the Xiantian realm?" "Ha!" Prince Yan smiled faintly and replied, "No. This prince is also curious. How did you sneak into the palace?" Suddenly, Prince Yan said casually, scaring Ningqian so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. Prince Yan already knew about it? It was impossible for Zhang Sun to reveal this, so Prince Yan must have seen it himself. But when did he reveal this flaw? From beginning to end, he didn't have any contact with Prince Yan. How did he expose himself? Don't think too much. Your hand once touched the green sword. This prince knew then that you didn't cleanse yourself. Prince Yan walked in front and didn't stop. He continued to explain calmly. People have their own auras, swords have their own auras. The green sword has been with this prince for a long time, and its aura is connected to this prince's. Anything it touches, this prince can understand. Ningqian was shocked. There was such a thing in the world? It was too unbelievable. He had seen many 9th-level peak masters, but he had never heard of a sword aura. This Prince Yan's talent and martial arts talent were shocking. He was almost undefeatable. Ningqian fell silent. He didn't know how to explain. His experience in the palace was too complicated. It couldn't be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. If you don't want to say it, then don't. There's no need to hesitate. Focus on our journey. Prince Yan smiled and didn't ask any more questions. He didn't care. Everyone had secrets and he was no exception. Everyone's secrets didn't exist to satisfy other people's curiosity. He wouldn't force it. Ningqian let out a sigh of relief. He really didn't know how to explain. After leaving Wushuang City, they weren't far from Sword City. However, the sky was getting dark. It was inconvenient for wheelchairs to travel. The two slowed down their pace. They were still walking. No matter how slow they were, they could arrive before dawn. Therefore, they weren't in a hurry. "How much did you understand from the battle just now?" Under the night sky, Prince Yan asked slowly as he walked slowly in front. Senior's green and red swords, one cold and the other hot. The wind and rain master swords each carried the image of wind and rain. Senior used the red sword to fight the wind. The wind helped the fire. As long as the fire didn't go out, the red sword wouldn't lose. As for the green sword, the rain is water. When it meets the cold, it condenses. Senior used the cold to control the rain. Ningqian described what he saw word by word. In the battle just now, although Prince Yan's strength was completely suppressed, Prince Yan's battle wisdom was even more shocking. Among the 4 swords, Prince Yan chose the 2 most suitable ones instead of the 2 strongest ones. If they were talking about the strongest, then the sword that was the deepest in the sword rack could easily suppress the green and red swords. In addition, the blue ancient sword was also extraordinary. It wasn't inferior to the green and red swords. In front of them, Prince Yan nodded and said, "Remember, the sword is a killing weapon. It is also the king of weapons. To be a king, you must have both wisdom and courage. If you blindly show off and use your strength to suppress others, you will end up in a disadvantageous position." Ningqian bowed and said respectfully, "Senior, thank you for your guidance." Prince Yan nodded and didn't say anything else. He continued on his way. Ningqian followed behind and thought quietly. It was rare to see a battle between peak 9th rank martial artists. Especially at such a close distance, it was very helpful for his martial arts cultivation. Vaguely, he felt that he had touched something. However, when he sensed it carefully, the feeling disappeared. In front of them, Prince Yan's face flashed with surprise. He slowed down again. It seemed that this kid was close to breaking through. Martial arts 5th rank was a hurdle. Once you crossed it, you would see the world. If you couldn't, you would be a frog at the bottom of the well. This kid's foundation was so strong that even he envied it. It was the first time he had seen someone like this in his life. Once he broke through this hurdle, his strength would definitely increase by a lot. On the way, Ningqian slowed down. He kept thinking. Gradually, the wheelchair stopped and didn't move forward. Prince Yan also stopped. He stood aside and didn't say anything. Boom! After about an hour, Ning Chen's aura spread out. The silver light shone brightly. The temperature within 10 feet of him dropped rapidly. The water vapor condensed and frost fell. Prince Yan guarded him quietly. His green robe was blown by the spiritual qi from all directions. In the sword rack, the green sword hummed lightly. It was very cheerful. In the next moment, the vast spiritual qi swept the frost into Ning Chen's body crazily. He broke through the hurdle and reached the peak of 5th rank. Prince Yan looked at Ning Chen, who was in the middle of the spiritual qi. Gradually he frowned. There was another kind of aura. In Ning Chen's ocean of qi, the dark yellow cyclone spun faster. It wanted to forcibly seize some spiritual qi from heaven and earth. At this moment Prince Yan moved. He came in front of Ning Chen in one step. He waved his hand and the Zhiga sword came out. Then he pointed the sword lightly and the thick earth seal broke. Prince Yan's sword finger turned again. He concentrated and poured all the thick earth qi into Ning Chen's ocean of qi. With a painful groan, the two colors around Ning Chen flickered. His cultivation broke through again and reached the 6th rank. Tomes of Arcane. At the same time, Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. He was surprised. There was no mistake. It was indeed the Tomes of Arcane, and there were 2 volumes. If the Tomes of Arcane didn't appear when he broke through and they were close enough, he wouldn't have noticed. No wonder this kid had such a strong foundation. With 2 volumes of Tomes of Arcane, it was impossible for him to be ordinary. The excess thick earth qi was taken away. The Zhiga sword fell into silence temporarily. Prince Yan waved his hand and put the heavy sword back on the sword rack. Then he stepped aside and waited for Ning Chen to wake up. After a long time, Ning Chen finally stabilized his cultivation state. He slowly opened his eyes and bowed down respectfully. "Thank you for your help, Senior." Although he couldn't move during the breakthrough, his spiritual sense wasn't shut off. He knew what Prince Yan had done for him. This was a great favor. If there is too much thick earth qi, it will affect the sword's aura. Instead of sealing it in the sword, I'd rather give it to you. Prince Yan nodded and said calmly. For a heavy sword, the heavier it was, the better it was. The more thick earth qi, the better it was. He had sealed most of the thick earth qi for this reason. Let's go. We've already wasted a lot of time. If we don't hurry, we won't be able to reach Sword City by dawn. Prince Yan turned and walked forward. Ning Chen nodded and turned his wheelchair to follow. He didn't know that Prince Yan had already seen the 2 golden pages in his body when he injected the thick earth qi. He also didn't know that the 2 pages were Tomes of Arcane. He only knew that Tomes of Arcane existed. He didn't know anything else. In the end, he hadn't been in this world for long. There were still many things he didn't know. Under the night sky, the 2 of them hurried towards Sword City. They didn't say anything and just listened to Ning Yi. Finally, the 2 of them arrived at Sword City at dawn. This was an ancient and huge deserted city. There were very few people. They couldn't see anyone even after walking for a long time. However, this was the most dangerous city because anyone who appeared in this city could be an incredible cultivator. Sword City was the holy land of all swordsmen in the world, but it was also a forbidden place for them. Killing wasn't the only rule in Sword City. The only rule was that the strong were respected. On the streets of Sword City, there were traces of swordsmen fighting everywhere. Every sword mark was at least 2 fingers deep. Blood spilled everywhere. It had already dried up, but there was still a faint fishy smell in the air. After Ning Chen stepped into Sword City, he became anxious. He wanted to see Mu Changxue, but he didn't want to see her so soon. He was afraid that his guess would become a reality. "Are you afraid?" Prince Yan frowned and asked softly. Ning Chen smiled bitterly, but he couldn't suppress his body's reaction. He was afraid that Mu Changxue had forgotten about him. That she that day was cold and indifferent. It was as if she had abandoned all emotions in the world. Could it be that in order to reach Xiantian she had really cut off her past? "If you're afraid, why are you so determined to come?" Prince Yan frowned and asked. "I want an answer." Ning Chen said gloomily. "What if the answer disappoints you?" Prince Yan asked aggressively. Ning Chen's body trembled. He had thought about this question before, but he kept avoiding it. She was the first person to talk to him, the first person to spare his life, the first person to cut him, the first person to run away with him. How could she forget him? Chapter 57. Ningchen felt terrible, extremely terrible. He did not know how to answer. If Mu Changxue forgot about him, what could he do? Tie her up and take her away? She was the sixth nascent master in the world. If she did not want to, who could take her away? There was no snow in Barren City all year round. It was said that the sword in the city did not like snow. Therefore, all the snow in the world could not reach Barren City. After coming to Barren City, Prince Yan had been following Ningchen. If Ningchen wanted to find someone, he should lead the way. The wheelchair sank half an inch into the stone floor. Ningchen looked around Barren City. He looked at every street and every room. Prince Yan looked at Ningchen looking like a fool. He did not say anything and did not stop him. There were hundreds and thousands of streets in Barren City and tens of thousands of rooms. If he wanted to find someone, he could do it himself. How many times could a person be foolish in his life? He could see that this person was very important to Ningchen, more important than he could imagine. Most of his knowledge of Ningchen came from Zhang Sun and the legends of the world. Until they met, he finally matched his impression of Ningchen with reality. The little eunuch mentioned by Zhang Sun was mischievous and unruly, but he was loyal and trustworthy. The little hero in the legends was brave, smart, and respectable. The Ningchen in Prince Yan's eyes was cold, arrogant, and even cruel. However, such a person at this moment seemed to have gone crazy. He was weak but also manic. Prince Yan followed behind without saying a word. His eyes were calm and unwavering, as deep as a lake. Ningchen's state was actually very dangerous. The biggest taboo in martial arts was to have an unstable state of mind. He had just broken through to the sixth realm. If he did not have a firm belief, his cultivation could regress at any time. However, Prince Yan could tell that the person Ningchen was looking for was much more important to him than his own cultivation. Therefore, he did not stop him or say anything. If his cultivation retreated, he could just cultivate again. Compared to the things he treasured in life, it was nothing. It had to be said that Prince Yan and Ningchen had the same understanding on this point. The barren city was really huge. Ningchen let Prince Yan to search the city bit by bit. There was no hope in his eyes, no sighs of disappointment. They just went in and out of the same place and kept repeating. Desolate City used to be a flourishing ancient city. It was even more powerful than Wuxia City. After the war, it gradually declined. Especially in the past 200 years, there were fewer and fewer people in Desolate City. If it wasn't for the sword in the city, it would have been taken over by Great Xia. In truth, Great Xia had not increased its territory in 700 years. The main reason was that the wars in the first 300 years were too frequent, and the people and soldiers were sick of war. No one remembered the previous name of Desolate City. Now, people either called it Desolate City or Sword City. No one cared what it was originally called. One day was very short. From the time Ningchen and Prince Yan entered the city in the early morning until now, the sky was getting dark. They had already searched countless streets and houses. When swordsmen saw the two of them, they would silently avoid them. In Sword City there was no trust. No one wanted to cause trouble for no reason. Ningchen purposely stopped a swordsman. He described Mu Chengshue's appearance and asked him if he had seen him before. However, this swordsman had just arrived and was not much more familiar with the situation in Desolate City than Ningchen. In fact, everyone who came to Sword City was looking for traces of the sword in the past. They wanted to make a breakthrough. Everyone was looking for something, but they were looking for the sword while Ningchen was looking for the person. The figures that passed by each other no longer interacted with each other. Ningchen's irritation grew stronger as time passed. His cultivation that had just stabilized at level 6 last night was starting to show signs of loosening. Prince Yan squinted his eyes slightly but did not say anything. If he did not care, then let him be. Just as the sky was about to turn completely dark, in the distance, a black figure caught up with them. It did not take long for them to catch up. The eye-catching insignia on their black clothes showed that they were the Shadow Guards and Shadow Dragon Guards of Great Xia. There were 11 of them, 1 Shadow Dragon Guard and 10 Shadow Guards. All of them had powerful auras and extraordinary abilities. The leader of the Shadow Dragon Guards recognized Prince Yan and knelt down. He stood up and said respectfully, Prince Yan, His Majesty has ordered us to bring Ning Chan back. Please do not interfere. Prince Yan glanced at Ning Chan, who seemed to be oblivious and was still searching silently. He said lightly, Level 9 stays. The rest is up to you. The Shadow Dragon Guard looked troubled. The Level 9 mentioned by Prince Yan was of course him. However, Emperor Xiao's order was to capture him alive. If he did not interfere, the chances of capturing him alive would be much lower. Who would have thought that Ning Chan, who couldn't even defeat an ordinary imperial bodyguard in the past, would escape from their hands twice? The first time it was still fine because he was thrown off a cliff by God's son and luckily survived. But the second time, the former escaped from their sight with the help of the Empress's escort. Emperor Xiao was furious because of this. Go and capture him. If he resists, kill him. The Shadow Dragon Guards hesitated for a moment and made a prompt decision. If they could not capture him alive, then kill him. They could not let this little eunuch escape again. Yes. The 10 Shadow Guards accepted the order and quickly chased after the figure in front of them. Ning Chan had just come out of a room and was about to continue searching for the next one when he saw 10 shadows surrounding him. The shadows blocked his path. Ning Chen's path forward was blocked. He could not help but become extremely irritated. He shouted, Move! The wheelchair moved forward towards the space between the 2 shadow guards. Ning Chan was in a bad mood and did not want to care about anything. Follow us back to the palace. The 2 shadow guards pressed their hands on Ning Chen's shoulders and said in a low voice. In his irritation, Ning Chan could not suppress the anger in his heart and finally exploded. Scram! A violent airflow spread out. Immediately, the 2 shadow guards felt their arms go numb and their bodies become unstable. They took 3 steps back. Kill! The sudden resistance left no room for negotiation between the 2 sides. The order to kill was given and the long swords were drawn. The intertwining sword shadows formed a sword net and fell towards Ning Chan. Among the 10 people present, the lowest cultivation was at level 5. The highest was at level 7. All of you deserve to die. Ning Chan, who was furious, lost his mind. He raised his left hand slightly and a dark yellow light shone brightly, enveloping the 10 people. Boom! In an instant, the unparalleled gravity caused the bodies of the 10 people to suddenly fall. Before they had time to react, they saw the ink sword being unsheathed amidst the drifting frost. Snowflakes surged, and an ink light streaked across, cutting through their throats. The moment of shock brought about the most drastic change. Before the 4 people could stabilize themselves, they fell to the ground with a bang. The 6 people were shocked and even angrier. As Emperor Xiao's personal guards, they had never been trampled on like this. The remaining 6 people were mentally prepared. They formed groups of 3 and took turns attacking and defending. They did not rush forward recklessly. Ning Chen's eyes were as cold as frost. He held the ink sword in his hand. Killing people was his priority. Soon the 7 people were all dyed red. Ning Chan controlled the chi of earth, which made the 6 shadow guards very uncomfortable. However, the advantage in numbers was still unshakable. Every time the 2 sides exchanged injuries, it was a sign that the shadow guards were one step closer to victory. After a long battle without any results, Ning Chan showed a trace of impatience. Taking advantage of the gap between the 3 people's attack and defense, he knocked away 3 shadow guards with a bang. The wheelchair took advantage of the momentum to retreat 10 feet away. Just as the other 3 shadow guards were about to rush forward, they saw the ink sword stabbed into the ground. A green ancient bow appeared in Ning Chen's hand. The next moment, the silver light shone brightly and a terrifying arrow flew out. The 6 shadow guards narrowed their eyes. At the moment of contact, the silver arrow penetrated their bodies and 2 shadow guards flew out. Their blood dyed the sky red. The momentum of attack and defense was broken. Ning Chan patted the wheelchair and 6 shadow arrows appeared. They turned into faint black lights and swept towards the strongest of the remaining 4 people. Clang! With a few soft sounds, the shadow guards blocked 5 dark arrows. However, the last dark arrow suddenly fell at the last moment and changed direction. The shadow guard trembled and stepped back half a step when the shadow arrow entered his body. At a distance of 10 feet, the chi of earth was not enough to affect the 4 people. However, it was enough to affect 1 shadow arrow. And his shadow arrows had always been coated with medicine. It was not poison. It was just a strong anesthetic. Beside Prince Yen, the shadow guard was shocked. In just a few breaths, 6 of the 10 shadow guards were dead and 1 was injured. When did Ning Chan grow to such a level? If this continued, the 10 shadow guards would all be buried here. The shadow guard felt a chill in his heart. He could no longer care about Prince Yen. He moved and was about to attack personally. I said that the rank 9 will stay. At the same time, a calm voice sounded. In front of the shadow guards, Prince Yen blocked their path and did not allow them to take half a step forward. Prince Yen, you are disobeying His Majesty's order. The shadow guard was furious and shouted. Is it serious? It was a simple sentence. He did not care at all. Prince Yen stood calmly between the shadow guard and Ning Chan. He was like a tall mountain that no one could cross. You! The shadow guard was about to move again when he suddenly felt his breath stagnate. At the same time, he was shocked and fearful. There was an indignant grunt. On the other side of the battlefield, the dark shadow guard who had been injured by the dark arrow was unable to escape the fate of death. Ning Chan, who had lost his patience, was no longer as shy and harmless as before. Every move he made was aimed at killing. The last 3 shadow guards who received Ning Chen's wrath became more and more frightened and cold as the battle went on. They had to guard against the strange dark yellow light, and also had to be wary of the terrifying arrow light. Their moves were more defensive than offensive, and for a time they were defeated again and again. After 10 moves, Ning Chen's lips curved dangerously. He used the same trick again. After using all his strength to push back the 3 shadow guards, he moved back in his wheelchair and stabbed the ink sword into the ground. The broken death appeared again. The 3 were shocked and rushed forward to stop this frightening arrow. However, the expected shadow arrow did not appear. Instead, it was a merciless shadow sword. After the shadow sword, a cold voice echoed in their ears. Idiots, I lied to you. Bang bang bang. Under their unwilling and incredulous gazes, the 3 fell to the ground and could not get up again. Chapter 58. Cough cough. Ning Chan covered his bleeding chest and coughed violently. Then, a silver light shone on his right hand and sealed the wound. He ignored it. As for the other wounds on his body, they were not fatal. It would not be too late to heal them after finding Mu Changxue. Ning Chan continued his search. Not far behind, the dark dragon guard's face turned ugly. He stared at the person in front of him and said sternly, Yanqing Prince, I will report what happened today to His Majesty. I hope you can take care of yourself. Heh. Yanqing Prince chuckled and followed Ning Chan. I'll be waiting. Hearing this, the dark dragon guard's face changed again and again. Then he turned into a ray of light and flew back the way he came. He had to report what happened today to Emperor Xia as soon as possible. Ning Chen's growth was too terrifying. In just a few months he had surpassed all the dark shadow guards. There was also the bow in his hand, which was a great threat. Even he felt a trace of pressure from the arrow just now. After the dark dragon guard left, Ning Chan and Yanqing Prince did not pay attention to him. They continued to search house by house and street by street. The night was long. Under the moonlight, the figure on the wheelchair was tired and stubborn. Behind him, another figure followed without a word. Suddenly the world changed. Above the 9 heavens, a sword light shone like the moon. With a boom, it slashed towards the distance. Bang! Another powerful aura blocked it. It was a bit weaker, but it could still fight. Mu Chengxue. Ning Chen's body shook. He looked at the sword light above the 9 heavens. Then he moved his wheelchair and rushed forward. There was no mistake. It was definitely her aura. Yanqing Prince frowned. He walked a few steps quickly and turned into a ray of green light to follow. In this short period of time, the 2 strong cultivators had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Their figures could not be seen clearly, but they were so powerful that it was scary. After a while the battle stopped. The moon above the 9 heavens slowly descended. Her clothes were as white as snow. Her perfect face was cold and emotionless, without a trace of human emotions. Mu Chengxue. The black wheelchair stopped. Ning Chan looked at the beautiful girl in front of him. First he was happy. Then his smile froze and disappeared. His heart also sank. The beauty that entered his eyes was just like her coldness. It was perfect yet unreal, so distant that it was untouchable. The coldness in his eyes was like a knife or a sword, cutting Ning Qian until he couldn't breathe. She had really forgotten about him. The sudden heavy blow made it difficult for Ning Qian to suppress the injuries that had accumulated in his body for a long time. He grunted and vomited blood. The next moment, the dark yellow and silver auras around Ning Qian's body flickered continuously. His state of mind changed drastically, and he could no longer maintain his unstable cultivation. He fell directly from the 6th grade martial path. Prince Yan's expression changed. He took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Yi Futian. He condensed qi with his finger and pointed at Yi Futian's qi. "See. Calm your mind." The Prince of Yan bellowed in a deep voice. He activated his cultivation technique by 30% and forcibly suppressed the raging vital qi in the former's body. Not far away, Mu Changxue was quietly watching this scene. There was no change in his cold eyes. His realm fell and the heavenly book appeared. Ning Qian didn't care about his injuries and forced the golden paper of the life scroll out of his body. Then he vomited a mouthful of red blood. Dyeing the heavenly book red. "Do you still remember it? You gave it to me to strengthen my body." Ning Qian smiled brightly. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth and gradually dyed most of his clothes red. People couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Life scroll. Mu Qingshue's calm face finally changed. He didn't remember anything. Instead, he became even colder. "You deserve to die." The cold voice destroyed Ning Qian's last bit of hope and perseverance. At this moment, a sword light as bright as the moon slashed down. Heaven and earth lost all colors. Boom! The moment the moon fell, the Zhiga sword was drawn and blocked this deadly sword. Prince Yan's expression was unprecedentedly serious. He said slowly, "With me here, no one can hurt him today." The life scroll that was dripping blood floated in front of Ning Qian, but it couldn't call back the lost memories. From now on, they would be separated by the horizon. Hee. Crazy and soulless laughter echoed in Desolation City. It was so desolate under the night sky. Clang! The swords collided, one heavy and one fast. Prince Yan held the Zhiga sword and faced Mu Changxue, who was in the nascent realm. The battle reached a climax in an instant. A legend versus a nascent realm. It was supposed to be a battle of great disparity. However, because the swords in their hands repulsed each other, it became a stalemate. At this moment, another powerful figure came. After seeing the life scroll in front of Ning Qian, his face darkened. It turned out that the life scroll wasn't in Princess Miao Yu's hands that day. It was in the hands of the person in front of him. God's son's aura was a bit messy. Just now, he used up a lot of energy in the battle with Mu Changxue. After a short rest, he barely recovered 70% of his energy. Prince Yan couldn't help but frown at the appearance of the new powerhouse. His Zhiga sword became even heavier. The thick earth energy spread out, trying to slow down Mu Changxue's extreme speed. Not far away, God's son slowly walked over. His figure flashed a few times and arrived in front of Ning Qian. He pressed his palm down without hesitation. "This person deserves to die." Bang! At this critical moment, another sword flew out from the sword rack. Prince Yan arrived in the blink of an eye. He gripped his left hand and held his sword in front of Ning Qian, blocking God's son's palm power. "I said today no one can hurt him." Prince Yan's expression was calm and serious. His tone didn't allow any doubt. Two swords against two geniuses. The legend of Xia stood in front of Ning Qian alone, protecting this last line of defense. He didn't allow anyone to take half a step in front of him. Mu Changxue, God's son. Both of them were aiming for the life scroll. However, they were stopped by Prince Yan. Their eyes were unusually cold. Swish! The beautiful snow-colored figure moved. Prince Yan's Zhiga sword moved at the same time. The thick earth energy and his own perception of the sword energy barely blocked Mu Changxue's sword. At the same time, God's son moved his feet lightly. His palm moved like wind and thunder. The blue ancient sword in Prince Yan's left hand used softness to overcome hardness. Endless blue water light received the power of wind and thunder and scattered it into the ground. Facing two of the most powerful geniuses of the younger generation, even the legend of Xia dynasty put 10% of his offense and 9% of his defense. He was surrounded by danger. Every move was fast and heavy. His palm was strong and his sword was soft. The two swords faced the enemy from the left and right. There was no gap between attack and defense. However, he gradually showed signs of being unable to hold on. After a dozen or so moves, Prince Yan's halting spear slowed down by half a beat. Immediately, the Chang'ing sword flashed past, and a piece of green cloth silently floated down from his right sleeve. The King of Yen frowned and looked at the sword in the depths of the sword rack. A hint of hesitation flashed across his heart. It was already difficult to deal with Mu Changxue with the sword in his hand. With God's son, he had no chance of winning. In the moment of hesitation, Prince Yan's sword power was insufficient. His left hand that was holding the sword couldn't help but feel slightly numb. Prince Yan sighed helplessly. When he finally made up his mind to pull out the sword in the deepest part of the sword rack, suddenly, an earth-shattering aura exploded behind him. 3 terrifying arrows shot out like stars and moons, shooting towards the Son of God in the middle of the battle. The sudden change broke the stalemate. Prince of Yen moved his body and understood. He combined the 2 swords. The Zhiga sword knocked away Mu Changxue, and the blue ancient sword released a vast water wave. Then he grabbed Ning Chan and turned into a beam of flowing light, flying away. Mu Changxue was about to chase after him, but he was trapped by the wave of water and slowed down. Boom, boom, boom. On the other side, God's son took 3 steps back after receiving 3 arrows. Although he wasn't at his peak, he was still unharmed. Prince Yen brought Ning Chan 100 miles away from the barren city before stopping in the wilderness. It wasn't that he didn't want to continue, but that Ning Chan couldn't hold on any longer. The last 3 arrows had completely exhausted all of Ning Chen's energy. Even if he was at his peak, he didn't try to draw the second arrow. Not to mention shooting 3 arrows consecutively when his injuries were worsening. Hold on. Prince Yan's heart sank when he saw the chaotic aura around Ning Chan, and the blood that kept flowing out. His previous injuries were still manageable, but after his realm dropped, the scattered aura rushed in all directions, worsening his injuries by several times. What was worse was that the true essence in Ning Chen's Qi Si, which was used to suppress his injuries, was also used up in an instant. He couldn't stop his injuries from worsening. With a muffled groan, Ning Chen's body swayed. He immediately turned his head and vomited a mouthful of blood. His consciousness gradually faded. Prince Yen stepped forward and poured his vast aura into Ning Chen's body, forcefully suppressing all the true qi in his body. This can't go on. After a while, Prince Yen stopped. He knew he couldn't save people, so he had to think of another way. He grabbed Ning Chan with his right hand and turned into a stream of light, flying away. Not long after the two left, a beautiful figure in white appeared. She glanced at the blood on the ground and frowned. She immediately turned and left. Wushuang City. Prince Yen brought Ning Chan and flew quickly. He pushed open the gate of Prince Tai's residence and directly rushed to the front hall. In the next moment, a heavy shout resounded through the entire residence. "Second brother, quickly come out and save him." That shout roused everyone in the residence. Prince Tai quickly arrived in the hall. Seeing Prince Yan's somewhat chaotic aura, his heart sank. This was clearly the sign of a huge battle. He understood his third brother better than anyone else. Thus, he was even more aware of Ning Chen's extraordinary accomplishments on the martial path. There were only a few people in the world who could force him to this point. Prince Tai was just about to ask when Prince Yen raised a hand to stop him. "We'll talk about the rest later. Save him first." Prince Tai finally noticed Ning Chan, who was leaning against his wheelchair. He reached out to check his pulse, and his expression gradually became unsightly. What a chaotic pulse. Prince Tai's doubts grew. The chaotic true qi in Ning Chen's body was clearly a sign of his cultivation technique collapsing. But with his third brother here, how could such a thing happen? What shocked him even more was that this person wasn't a eunuch. At this time, Xiaonini also arrived in the hall. Looking at the unconscious Ning Chan covered in blood, she strangely didn't feel any joy in her heart. Instead, she felt a complicated and indescribable heaviness. In the hall, Prince Tai temporarily suppressed the doubts in his heart. He looked at his third brother and said sternly, "Do you know how much of a price it will cost to save him?" In this world, there was no gratuitous favor, and there was no unrequited favor. He couldn't help anyone. Prince Yen didn't answer. He only said 2 words in a deep voice, "Save him." Prince Tai frowned again. Looking at Xia Nianyi's stubborn appearance, he finally nodded helplessly. "Nianyi, go get the heaven reversal pill." "Yes." Xia Nianyi responded and immediately ran to the pill room. Xia Nianyi left. In the hall, Prince Yen looked at the miserable Ning Chan in the wheelchair and couldn't help but sigh. Time only left a name, not mercy. Chapter 59. Xia Nianyi quickly returned, holding a box carved from green jade in her hands. Opening the box, there was only a Longan-sized pill quietly lying inside. There were millions of pills in the world, but very few of them had the qualifications to have the word heavenly in them. But any pill with the word heavenly meant it was inextricably linked to the Xiantian realm. For example, the Xiantian pill in the Grand Xia's imperial palace, or the heaven reversal pill in Xia Nianyi's hand. The word heavenly was just like its name. To the current Ningchan, it was one of the few pills that could save his life. As soon as the pill entered his mouth, its vast medicinal energy erupted. It was powerful and domineering, directly charging into his qi. Ningchan let out a pained groan as he frowned. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Imperial Prince Yen frowned and stepped forward. His right hand formed a sword, and he poured his true yuan into Ningchen's qi. Using the domineering medicinal energy, he repeatedly combed through Ningchen's chaotic meridians. This heaven reversal pill's medicinal energy was too domineering. If the person who took it didn't have a Xiantian or someone infinitely close to the Xiantian realm to help suppress it, they would probably die before the pill could even be used. Fortunately, Prince Yen was here. After a long while, Ningchen's injuries gradually stabilized. Seeing this, Prince Yen pointed his sword finger and sealed most of the medicine in Ningchen's body, leaving only a little to help him recover. After that, Imperial Prince Yen retracted his hand and let out a tired sigh. "Third brother, you have to think this through. His identity might bring you a lot of trouble." Imperial Prince Tai waited for Imperial Prince Yen to finish before warning him. Someone who hadn't been cleansed had actually stayed in the Imperial Palace for so long. Once this matter was exposed, it was easy to imagine how big of a commotion it would cause. The Xia Emperor definitely wouldn't allow such a scandal to spread. He would definitely kill everyone who knew about it. Imperial Prince Yan's identity was special. Although he wouldn't be killed, it would definitely arouse the Xia Emperor's suspicion and dissatisfaction. Imperial Prince Yan's expression didn't change at all. He slowly said, "Don't worry, second brother. I know what I'm doing." Imperial Prince Tai sighed and didn't say anything else. He hoped Imperial Prince Yen really did know what he was doing. The current Xia Emperor really wasn't a benevolent ruler. 10 days later, Prince Yen left Prince Tai's mansion with Ning Chan, who had just recovered from his injuries. Ning Chen's injuries couldn't be healed in a short period of time. However, as long as he didn't use force, he wouldn't explode easily. The heaven revolving pill was omnipotent, but it was not omnipotent. It was not easy to pull Ning Chan back from the gates of hell in one piece. As for the cultivation he had lost, he could only rely on himself to regain it. He had already sealed the remaining medicinal effects of the heaven-changing pill into the latter's body. It might come in handy one day. Their destination was the south of the Xia Kingdom. This year, Ning Chan was the swordsman of Prince Yen and was responsible for carrying his sword. Prince Yen wanted to go to the south of the Great Xia. The reason was simple. In the vast empire, this was the only place he had not been to. Furthermore, it was time to settle a grudge from the past. Ning Chan did not express any opinion. Ever since he woke up, he rarely spoke. Prince Yen did not try to persuade him, nor did he care. In his eyes, any words of encouragement were useless. If he could not overcome the hurdle in his heart, no one would be able to persuade him. The road to the south was very long and long. The two walked very slowly, step by step, as if they were sightseeing. The heavens gave you a pair of eyes, not just to let you look at the ground beneath your feet, Prince Yen said calmly as he walked in front and looked at the scenery. Ning Chan raised his head and looked at Ming Chuan in front of him. Then, he fixed his gaze on Prince Yen and said unhappily, "Thank you for your advice, senior. However, Ning Chan is not in the mood to appreciate it. I am not trying to enlighten you. I am just telling you that if you keep your head down like this, you will always see the ground beneath your feet. However, your eyes can see much more than this. I understand. Ningqian nodded and said respectfully. For the rest of the journey, Ningqian no longer kept his head down. Instead, he looked forward. Even if he was not in the mood to appreciate it, he silently imprinted the scenery in front of him into his eyes. Prince Yan knew that Ningqian was not someone who was easily influenced by the outside world. However, after seeing more, he would slowly change. Half a month later, the two arrived at the south of the Xia kingdom. Unlike the north, the weather here was relatively warm. Even in the 12th month of winter, there was no bone-chilling cold. After arriving here, the pain in Ningqian's legs lessened significantly. This was perhaps the only thing worth being happy about. There was a Prince Yu in the south. He was the 7th brother of Prince Yan and also the youngest of Emperor Xia's 4 surviving brothers. However, he was also the one who had been sent the furthest away. It was not that Prince Yu had done anything wrong. In fact, during the battle for the throne, Prince Yu was still immature. However, Prince Yu's mother had offended the current Emperor Xia too much. Prince Yu was simply implicated. After arriving here, Prince Yan was not in a hurry to see his youngest brother. They had not seen each other for nearly 20 years. Even their memories had become blurry. First, he wanted to go to the Barbarian dynasty to see someone and settle a grudge. The Barbarian dynasty was close to the south. It was a dynasty about the same size as the true extreme country. The current barbarian king was a powerful cultivator who was infinitely close to the Xiantian realm. When he was still the crown prince, he had hidden his identity and infiltrated the Xia kingdom. He had fought with Prince Yan, who had also not yet been crowned king. At that time, the 3rd prince of the Xia kingdom had already shown his talent in martial arts. He was known as the crown prince of the Xia kingdom. This made Prince Yan very unhappy. The two of them fought outside the palace. This matter shocked the entire world. Only then did they know that there was someone in the younger generation who could be mentioned in the same breath as the 3rd prince of the Xia kingdom. The northern Yan and the southern barbarians were spread throughout the world after that battle. The two of them had agreed to fight again when they reached the Xiantian realm. Now Prince Yan could take that step at any time. Barbarian King did not hold back either. He had been at the peak of the acquired realm for many years, waiting for the opportunity to break through. Ningqian had only heard about the previous generation's incident. However, in his opinion, Prince Yan would not lose. After the battle in Sword City, Ningqian realized that although they were both at the peak of the acquired realm, the difference in strength between them was like heaven and earth. People as strong as Son of God and Prince Yan could even fight with Mu Changxue, who had just reached the Xiantian realm. He still could not understand what kind of realm this was. However, he knew that the Xiantian realm was a natural moat that separated the heavens and the earth. The Xiantian realm was also known as the Heavenly Man. They could communicate with the power of heaven and earth. This was something that acquired realm masters could not compare to. However, there were very few people who could break through this uncrossable natural moat and fight Xiantian realm masters with their peak acquired realm cultivation. There had been such people in the past, today, and in the future. No matter how strong Barbarian King was, he could not be stronger than Prince Yan, who could already fight Xiantian realm masters. At least that was what Ningqian thought. The Barbarian King Palace was only a 2-day journey from the southern border. Prince Yan led Ningqian from outside the Barbarian King Palace and fought their way into the Barbarian King Palace. Everywhere they passed, there were no casualties. In fact, Prince Yan was not a person who liked to kill. The former crown prince of the Barbarian King was now sitting on the throne. His youthfulness was gone, replaced by endless majesty. "You're old," Prince Yan said calmly. "You haven't changed," Barbarian King sighed. "Return to your original appearance. It's only been 20 years. It's nothing to the current legend of the Xia kingdom." "Ha!" Prince Yan smiled faintly. His appearance changed instantly, and he returned to his youthful appearance from 10 years ago. "This is the 3rd prince that I know. He's both civil and military. He's arrogant and unruly." As he spoke, Barbarian King slowly stood up. At this moment the color of the sky changed. A heavy aura like that of a prehistoric beast quickly awakened, causing the space to distort. Ningqian stepped back. Prince Yan's expression became serious as he said in a low voice, "Okay." Ningchen nodded. He immediately put down the sword rack, turned his wheelchair and walked away. "Ah man, go and greet the guests." The barbarian king also said something to a pretty girl below the palace. Yes, the girl nodded. In the next moment, a man walked forward and pushed Ningchen away silently from the battlefield between the two. She knew that her father had been waiting for this battle for a long time. As the two of them walked away, the battle began. Prince Yan moved his hand. On the ground, the Zhiga sword flew from the rack and into his hand. At the same time, Barbarian King stomped his feet and immediately flew out like a cannonball. He suddenly punched towards Prince Yan. Boom! The sword and the fist collided. In the end, the fist suppressed the sword. Prince Yan retreated half a step. For the first time, a drop of blood fell from the corner of his mouth. Ningchen was shocked. Prince Yan, who had not been injured when facing Mu Changshui and the godson, was injured in the first move. This barbarian king's strength was too terrifying. He could definitely be called unparalleled in the world. I haven't seen you for 20 years. Your progress is not as great as mine. Barbarian King laughed wildly. He jumped up and suddenly stomped his foot. Prince Yan frowned. He moved his left hand. With a swoosh, the blue ancient sword flew out. He waved his hand and a wave of water filled the sky. Immediately, the Zhiga sword moved again and met Barbarian King's big foot head-on. Bang! Barbarian King's big foot broke through the water barrier and crashed into the Zhiga sword. A powerful shockwave spread out. The clothes of the two people fluttered. Prince Yan used his two swords to disperse Barbarian King's divine power, and finally managed to block the latter's attack. It wasn't until this moment that the two of them were once again on the same starting line. Their moves started again, and the rumbling sounds were endless, showing how fierce the confrontation between the two of them was. Beside Ningchen, a man's pretty face flashed with surprise. This was the first time she saw someone who could directly block her father's strength. Although it was a bit of a trick, he still managed to block it. Is this the legend of the Xia Kingdom? A man's voice was very pleasant to hear. It was clear and melodious. She did not have the shyness of a girl from the Central Plains. Instead, she had the unique straightforwardness of the barbarians. Ningchen nodded. Without a doubt, Prince Yan was the legend of the Xia Kingdom. Perhaps Yin Ma Xiao, the eldest prince, Xia Miaoyu and the others of the younger generation had already grown up. However, compared to Prince Yan, they still could not be mentioned in the same breath. Are you his disciple? A man continued to ask. Ningchen shook his head and replied, No, I'm just a sword attendant. The shock on Wild's face grew even stronger. Such a powerful person was just a sword attendant? She felt a dangerous aura from Ningchen. The barbarians had the sharpest senses. This meant that Ningchen's strength definitely surpassed hers. In the barbarian dynasty, the strongest person was her father. Perhaps there were others who were stronger than Ningchen, but there were not many of them. Especially among the younger generation, there were very few. Can you take me to the Central Plains to have a look? A man asked softly. Now she was even more curious about the mysterious Central Plains. What kind of divine land could nurture so many strong cultivators? Hearing this, Ningchen unconsciously frowned. He was not used to a man's way of speaking. They had just met. In fact, they could not even be considered as acquaintances. Shouldn't this kind of request be made by people who were familiar with each other? However, this was only the beginning. In the next moment, a man's next sentence made Ningchen completely speechless. If you agree, I can marry you. Chapter 60. Ningchen knew that most of the girls of the barbarian dynasty were straightforward. They spoke whatever they thought without hesitation or faking it. They didn't feel anything when they heard it from others and would even look at it with admiration. However, once it happened to him, it made him feel uncomfortable. Miss a man. Just call me a man, a man. Ningchen called out while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed through his eyes. She was a good girl, a very good girl. Unfortunately, they shouldn't have any interactions. Do you have someone you like? Ningchen asked softly. A man shook her head gently. I don't. Haha. Ningchen laughed bitterly. Once you have someone you like, you'll understand how childish your words are today. You don't agree? A man didn't understand the meaning behind Ning Chen's words, but she understood the rejection in his words. She couldn't help but frown. Why? There's no reason. If there's really a reason, then it's that you don't like me and I don't like you. Ning Chen was surprisingly patient as he explained. Why don't you like me? A man frowned even more. Could it be that I'm ugly? Ning Chen didn't know how to answer. If he didn't like her, then he didn't like her. There was no reason for it. However, he didn't want to hurt this pure and straightforward girl, so he thought for a moment before replying with a question. Then do you like me? A man thought for a moment before she said, I don't know. But I know that I don't hate you. Haha. Ning Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He continued patiently, a man, don't you want to understand the Central Plains? Then let me tell you something. In the Central Plains, only people who like each other can talk about marriage. Just not hating each other isn't enough. Is that so? A man nodded while seeming to be deep in thought. Then I'll work hard to like you and marry you. Then you'll take me to the Central Plains. Haha. Ning Chen laughed bitterly, but he didn't reply. If it was so easy to like someone, then he would have tried it a long time ago and wouldn't have to suffer as much as he did right now. Boom! Just as the two of them were talking, heaven and earth shook violently again. The battle in the main hall had reached its climax. Prince Yen combined his two swords and barely managed to fight to a draw with the barbarian king's divine power. Every move he made was 70% defensive and 30% offensive. The battle made heaven and earth miserable and chaotic. Many of the pillars in the main hall had already been destroyed. Some were shattered by the barbarian king's punches and kicks, and some were slashed by the Yen king's sword chi. Gravel flew everywhere and fell to the ground. The barbarian king was too powerful to the point of being inconceivable. His divine strength could shake mountains and split rocks. He was invincible and terrifying to the extreme. Using his unparalleled control of the sword, Prince Yen rotated his two swords and blocked one move with two moves. Only then was he able to block this terrifying divine power. Compared to 20 years ago, the barbarian king had indeed made great progress. Especially his divine power, it was simply heaven-defying. The thick earth energy in the Jiga sword had little effect on the barbarian king. Under his divine power, that little increase in gravity had almost no effect. Therefore, Yen Imperial Prince's battle was extremely difficult. It was even more difficult than when he faced Mu Changxuan God's child alone. Yen Imperial Prince, you will definitely lose today's battle. The barbarian king was like a demon. The more he fought, the braver he became. The more he fought, the crazier he became. His punches and kicks caused the void to explode and tremble unceasingly. Crack! Suddenly a soft sound was heard. The blue ancient sword in Yen Imperial Prince's hand couldn't withstand the huge force and a fine crack appeared. Haha! The barbarian king laughed wildly. He channeled another 30% of his divine power into his fist. Soon after a bang was heard. The ancient sword broke and half of the sword flew out. Yen Imperial Prince frowned. His expression gradually turned cold. He blocked the attack with his Jiga sword and took advantage of the momentum to retreat 10 meters away. The half of the sword that flew out fell to the ground. A touch of sadness flashed through Yen Imperial Prince's eyes. Although this blue ancient sword wasn't the strongest among the 4 swords, it had been with him the longest. It had also witnessed his lifetime of honor and disgrace. He didn't expect that it would be the first to leave today. With a wave of his hand, the broken ancient sword disappeared along with the half of the sword on the ground. With 2 clangs, they returned to the sword rack one after another. After the broken sword returned to its scabbard, Yen Imperial Prince's left hand grasped the void again. The green sword flew out and returned to his hand. The bone-piercing chill instantly filled the entire main hall. Again! His voice suddenly became colder. Yen Imperial Prince's body moved and instantly pressed forward. At the same time, the Jiga sword in his hand changed from defense to offense. The barbarian king received the attack. His divine power shook the heavy sword. Suddenly, he felt that the satisfaction that was within his reach disappeared. The sword turned upon contact. It didn't connect and didn't stop. In the next moment, the green sword was about to take his life. It was as fast as a swan. It was so fast that it disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was so fast that he died in the blink of an eye. The barbarian king's expression was serious. He took a step back for the first time. His divine power was restrained and he couldn't use it. However, the barbarian king was the barbarian king after all. 20 years ago, he was on par with Yin Imperial Prince. How could he be at a disadvantage so easily? The barbarian king who retreated was startled by the green sword. He immediately grabbed the Zhiga sword that came after him. The Zhiga sword was restrained. Yin Imperial Prince retreated to the side of the sword rack in an instant. He pulled out the red sword and turned to the front of the barbarian king again. The green and red sword moved at the same time. The two swords approached him. The barbarian king squinted his eyes. He grabbed the Zhiga sword and smashed it down like an iron rod. However, the two swords changed direction again. It was difficult to reach him. After switching to the red sword, Yin Imperial Prince's speed increased by 30%. The two swords moved side by side. The speed of the sword overpowered the divine power. The barbarian king quickly lost his balance and showed signs of defeat. 20 years, I've waited for this day for 20 years. How can I lose? The barbarian king couldn't suppress his anger. The aura around him soared to the sky. The terrifying celestial phenomenon shocked the entire southern land. Even the northern border of the Xia kingdom could see it clearly. The seventh Xianta. In an instant, countless people looked over. They were shocked by the sudden change. There was no mistake. That was indeed the aura of an Xiantian. It was powerful, shocking, and suppressed everything. It's the powerful barbarian king from the barbarian dynasty. After 20 years, I didn't expect that the southern barbarian king would be the first to reach the Xiantian realm. What about Yin Imperial Prince from the Xia kingdom? Why hasn't he broken through yet? It's not that easy to break through to the Xiantian realm. 2 Xiantian realm experts appeared in just 1 year. This is something that hasn't happened in the past 100 years. Although Yin Imperial Prince is amazing, he is indeed a big step behind the barbarian king this time. Unfortunately, from now on, the title of Northern Yin and Southern Barbarian will only exist in name. Not necessarily. Legend has it that Yin Imperial Prince from the Xia kingdom already has the strength to fight against Xiantian realm experts. The barbarian king has just broken through. It's still unknown who is stronger. Xiantian realm experts are Xiantian realm experts after all. No matter how strong the Hotian realm experts are, they can at most be on par with or have the strength to fight against them. They can never surpass them. No matter what, Yin Imperial Prince has been left far behind by the barbarian king. In just a few breaths' time, the experts in the world were all moved by the barbarian king's breakthrough to the Xiantian realm. Among the people of the same generation, the barbarian king and Yin Imperial Prince were the best. No one expected that the barbarian king would be the one to take the lead. In the palace of the barbarian dynasty, Yin Imperial Prince stood 30 feet in front of the barbarian king. He quietly watched the latter break through, but had no intention of interrupting him. Although he had the opportunity and ability to do so, there would be 3 calamities and 5 tribulations when breaking through to the Xiantian realm. The first tribulation, the heavenly demon tribulation, would come the moment one broke through. This was a test of one's state of mind. However, the barbarian king's mind was as firm as steel. This tribulation had no effect on him. It could be said that the people of the barbarian dynasty had a natural advantage when facing the heavenly demon tribulation. They were real firm and not fake. It had to be said that the barbarian king's strength was admirable, but at the same time, Yin Imperial Prince's integrity was also respectable. On the other side of the palace, a man looked at Yin Imperial Prince for a moment, then turned to look at Ning Qian and said, "He's a good person." Yes. Ning Qian nodded. Although their fighting philosophy was different, this did not stop him from admiring Yin Imperial Prince's personality. The legend of the Xia kingdom was worthy of this name no matter when, where, and under any circumstances. But my father is the strongest. A man continued. The princess of the barbarian dynasty was like an ordinary little girl who worshipped her father. In her eyes, her father was the strongest. Ning Qian did not respond. He did not know if the barbarian king was the strongest, but he knew that if the person standing opposite him was him, he would definitely shoot an arrow through the heart without hesitation. Therefore, Yin Imperial Prince could become the legend of the Chu dynasty, but he could not. After a few breaths, the barbarian king's realm finally stabilized. Looking at Yan Imperial Prince in front of him, a complicated look flashed across his eyes. There was hostility but also admiration. They were lifelong rivals but also people who respected each other the most. If not for their different standpoints, they would be best friends. Again. As he spoke, the barbarian king took a step forward. The palace rumbled and shook. The power of the Xiantian stage was undeniable. Yan Imperial Prince's expression hardened. He waved his green and red swords. 2 rays of light entered the ground and suppressed the shaking ground. In the next moment, the barbarian king's body flashed. He stepped over the barrier and punched. Yan Imperial Prince's eyes narrowed. He took a step back and instantly moved 10 feet away. Boom, boom, boom. In the violent shaking, a huge gully appeared between the two of them. The floor of the palace instantly cracked and flew everywhere. After the barbarian king broke through, his already terrifying divine power increased again. He was so strong that it was frightening. Just the strength of his physical body, without using any vital energy, was already so strong. It seemed that the battle between the two of them was gradually coming to an end. Yan Imperial Prince's green and red swords' overwhelming speed advantage was no longer so absolute because of the barbarian king's breakthrough. In addition to the barbarian king's skyrocketing divine power, there was not much suspense in this battle. As the saying goes, one strong person can defeat 10 skilled people. When one's strength reaches a certain level, it can suppress all moves. And the barbarian king, who had broken through to the Xiantian stage, had increased his strength to an unprecedented level. No matter how fast Yan Imperial Prince was, he was not so fast that he could not use any moves. Therefore, the battle was basically over. What a pity. I originally wanted to enjoy the pleasure of the battle a little longer. It seems that I can't. The barbarian king could feel the power still flowing out of his body. He could not help but sigh softly, slightly disappointed. The swords in Yan Imperial Prince's hands turned. The green and red swords immediately disappeared, turning into flowing light and entering the sword rack. You will enjoy it. As he spoke, Yan Imperial Prince walked to the sword rack. His right hand grasped the ancient sword hidden in the deepest part of the rack, and then he slowly pulled it out. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.